Welcome to the November 6, 2017 meeting of the Pacifica Planning Commission. I think we'll go ahead and start with a roll call.
Good evening, Commissioners. Commissioner Stedjink.
Present.
Vice Chair Cooper.
Cooper here.
Chair Niblin.
Here.
Commissioner Gordon.
Gordon here.
Commissioner Campbell.
Here.
And Commissioner Clifford.
Present.
We have one absence with Commissioner Kraske not present.
Thank you. I guess we'll start then with a salute to the flag. Maybe Commissioner Cooper could lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner Cooper. So we'll move then to the approval of minutes for October 2nd, 2017 and October 16th, 2017. Maybe it would make sense to take these one at a time, just in an abundance of caution. Commissioner Clifford.
Well, I think we should handle the order of agenda first.
Oh, I always forget that. Yeah, that's absolutely right. We do need to handle the order of agenda. Do you have a motion on that?
Yes, I would move to keep the order of agenda.
Okay, we'll keep okay. I did have one suggestion actually along those lines, and that is the designation of liaison to the City Council meeting. We have that set for November 27th, 2017. That's the date we would be designating for. And this pertains to the Alternative Financial Services Ordinance. Might make sense to go ahead and kick that particular item. The planning director actually suggested this to consideration after item number 2, in as much as we might not need a liaison depending on kind of what we do. So
I would certainly be willing to approve the agenda with that change.
okay, so we'll amend your motion along those lines, and I think Commissioner Cooper, yours was the next button.
I'll go ahead and second it with the with that change.
Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and vote then? Okay, so that's unanimously approved, the order of agenda with that amendment. So that then will take us to the approval of the minutes, and we've got, again, the minutes. We'll start with the minutes of October 2nd, 2017. I don't know if anybody has any comments or a motion on that. Commissioner Gordon.
I'll move that we approve the minutes from October 2nd, 2017.
Commissioner Stedjink.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Go ahead and vote.
I'll be abstaining.
Okay, we've got, looks like 4 votes in favor. Commissioner Cooper is abstaining, I understand. Commissioner Campbell, were you?
I was absent.
Okay. And one thing I'll say, just by way of clarification, I think some advice we've gotten recently from the city attorney is that really when we're voting on these, we're just voting on the form of the minutes. I want to make sure I got that right, such that even if you're absent, you could vote if you chose to.
You could if you chose to.
I'll vote because these were October 2nd, and I was here.
Okay. Real good. So it looks like then we've got 5 in favor and 1 abstention. We'll go ahead then and move to the minutes of October 16th, 2007. And looks like Commissioner Clifford.
I move to approve the minutes from October 16th, 2007.
Okay. And Commissioner Stedjink?
Second.
Okay, motion is second. We can go ahead and vote. Okay, so in this case, we've got 5 in favor, and it looks like Commissioner Cooper abstained in this case. So those minutes are approved. We've already talked about designation of liaison, oral communications, so we'll move to that. And this is the portion of the agenda that's available to the public to address the Planning Commission on any issue within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Commission that's not on the agenda. The time allowed for any speaker is 3 minutes. I don't have any speaker cards for oral communications tonight, and I don't see anybody getting up to offer any. So I'll wait a second more, and then I'll go ahead and conclude that nobody is going to address us under oral communications. So we'll go ahead then and move on to the consent items, none of which we've got, so we'll move past that as well. New public hearings, we'll start with the first item, which is CDP 38117, Coastal Development Permit, filed by applicant Brian Brinkman on behalf of the property owner David S. Colt to construct a 3,074 square foot single-family residence on an 8,000 square foot vacant parcel located on the south side of San Pedro Avenue, approximately 300 feet south of the intersection of San Pedro Avenue and Grand Avenue. The assessor parcel number of the property is 023073200. Another recommended CEQA action on this is a Class 3 categorical exemption, Section 15303 of the Public Resources Code. The recommended action is to approve as conditioned. Can we get a staff report for this item?
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Senior Planner Christian Murdoch from the Planning Department. The project before you for consideration is a single-family residence on a site designated in the general plan and zoning map for single-family development. As conditioned, the project would comply with all development standards and would be consistent with the general plan and local coastal plan. There are two items of note with respect to staff's review. The first is driveway width. Staff has recommended a condition of approval to narrow the proposed driveway to a maximum width of 20 feet, which is the typical standard applied to a single-family residence in the R1 zoning district. The applicant has proposed a driveway width of 37 feet. Pacifica Municipal Code Section 9-4.2813G does allow driveway width to exceed 20 feet on lots with greater than 50-foot frontages if the purpose is to create more off-street parking. In such cases, the driveway width shall not exceed 50% of the lot frontage or 40 feet, whichever is less. The applicant's proposed driveway width would be consistent with Section 9-4.2813G, but staff has not received information about the purpose of the widening. Moreover, given the hillside location of the project, it may be desirable to reduce the amount of impervious surface on the site to reduce stormwater runoff. However, it remains within the Commission's discretion to grant the wider driveway width. The second item requiring a bit of discussion is the landlocked nature of the project site. It does not front directly onto a public right-of-way, but rather is bound on all sides by other parcels. Staff has included a condition of approval requiring execution and recording of an easement for permanent access across an adjacent parcel, to provide access to the San Pedro Avenue public right-of-way. The easement must be drafted in a form acceptable to the city attorney and must be recorded prior to issuance of a building permit. The easement's required to provide lawful access from the project site across adjacent sites to the public right-of-way. Staff recommends approval of the project as conditioned, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I'll then turn to commissioners to see if there are any sort of clarifying questions for staff before we move to public hearing. Commissioner Cooper.
Yeah, I had a question on the driveway that's out there. It doesn't seem like it's a conforming driveway, nor does it seem like it's a driveway at all. There's no sidewalks, doesn't seem like there's any drainage. So how do people get in and out? It's an easement on another parcel, but what does it look like? And are we not requiring sidewalks in front of this property because they don't go anywhere, or how does that work?
So as you touched on, the site is currently vacant, and the adjacent site across which it would gain access to the right-of-way is currently vacant. So the access would be provided primarily across a driveway serving the future Anchor Inn motel project. And so the Planning Commission approved that driveway. If my memory serves me, it's a 20-foot wide driveway. Seeing as it's not a residential project, it didn't have sidewalks through the site to serve it. And so this project, if approved, would rely on that driveway and then a small extension into the project site.
It seems to me in that area, then there would be no curb and gutter in that area, so it would just kind of run down the hillside, and then there's really no control of anything as it comes off the driveway. And there's obviously no sidewalk there as well. And I was noticing as well as the end of that driveway, there's a gate post. Is that access to anything? Is there a trail up there?
I'm not familiar with where that gate is on the Anchor Inn site. I believe that's not on the
It'd be farther
public side.
up, but it's right along the frontage there. So as you go up the driveway and you hit the end, it seems like there's a gate post there. I was wondering if there's any public access in that parcel as well, because
No, it's private property, and there's no public trail in that location. And with respect to the drainage for the driveway on the Anchor Inn project, my recollection is that the applicant has graded it and voluntarily included detention basins that step down the slope to try to minimize the uncontrolled runoff. But perhaps the applicant can speak further to his plan for management of stormwater.
But what do we normally do? I mean, as a city in that case, you know, it's going to be a driveway that someone's private residence that has to go through this easement. How do we control what that looks like? I mean, that area up there is kind of beat up. The pavement's beat up anyways, and it seems like we're just kind of continuing that.
Well, outside of the coastal zone, most single-family residences don't require discretionary permits, so it's not often that the staff gets into great detail on those types of things. I would say, though, that it would be most common for runoff to run in an uncontrolled manner down a driveway into the curb and gutter that's in the street. As you mentioned, the Pedro Point neighborhood is very old and was not approved and developed largely under city jurisdiction. And so it was done in a way that doesn't meet current standards. And so it's not uncommon to be missing curb and gutter and proper drainage, and it's a known problem in this and other older neighborhoods.
So would we require any type of provisions within this easement that would allow for a curb or a gutter in this drive area?
Well, that would be controlled by the anchor in approval. And so, again, I'm not prepared at this time to talk to the details of that site drainage, but this project does not affect the design of that project.
The second issue I had was the amount of impervious pavement that's up there. There's a lot of patio and a lot of driveway, and it seems like we're really limiting the amount of water infiltration into that site. Normally I like to see a lot of impervious pavement in there, so what was the thought on that?
Sure. So the project of this type is exempt from the city's C3 or new development stormwater control standards, and so it's not obligated to comply with any heightened impervious surface or detention or treatment requirements. So if the commission finds, in order to make other findings for approval of the project, that reducing impervious surface is necessary, it's within its discretion to do that. However, there's no zoning or other municipal code standard that would limit impervious surface here.
What's the municipal code besides not applying to this particular parcel? What do we normally have as far as coverage? Isn't it like 30% or something like that?
Typically be 40% for structures, but that typically does not include things like hardscape, paving, patios, driveways, et cetera.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Stedjink.
Withdrawn.
Thank you. Commissioner Campbell.
The runoff from the driveway, it looks like it runs off into that easement. Was there analysis of how that would affect the easement?
No, not for this project. As mentioned, the Anchor Inn project was designed and, from my recollection, would grade the driveway and catch it along the eastern, which if you're looking at the site would be the left side of the driveway, and it would be transmitted into these biodetention ponds that step down the slope, and ultimately would discharge through a curb drain into San Pedro Avenue.
Thanks.
Commissioner Cooper, we'll come back to you. Go ahead.
Well, okay, I had one more question. In regards to the fire department and them getting up there, is there any restriction on the actual permit here for not actually constructing this house until the other driveway is in?
I believe we did include a condition of approval for that. It would take me a moment to try to find it, but
I think the condition was, if I remember correctly, was that they had to have a recorded easement to that property, but is there anything in the schedule that says, hey, you know what, that driveway has to be in and accessible prior to you getting a permit or finishing this house? I still want to see that if that person's house burns, I don't want to see a fire department saying, hey, I can't get up there.
Understood. Again, I believe we addressed that. If you'd give me a moment, or we could come back after the applicant's presentation, I could confirm that.
Thank you. I just have one other question myself, and that was, actually, I'm sorry, Commissioner Stedjink, go ahead.
Yeah, my concerns are on fire, too. I know that previous Anchor Inn project had a waiver on the turnaround up there because of space. Does anything about this current project change that waiver or the nature of the need for a turnaround on that?
I'm not aware that the fire authority has raised that as an issue.
Have they taken a look at this at all?
Yes, they've reviewed this project.
Thank you.
And to Commissioner Cooper, your inquiry, I believe condition number 33 is the one that we inserted to address your concern. It reads that the applicant shall install and make serviceable all fire service features, including fire hydrant, prior to beginning construction.
Okay, and does that, I know that there was a requirement for a particular fire hydrant up at that piece of property. Is the applicant then going to install that all the way to San Pedro Road, or is he waiting for the Anchor Inn to install that fire main?
The fire hydrant?
Yeah, you have to actually have a main that goes down to San Pedro, so is that Anchor Inn's scope of work, and then he's just connecting onto it?
Are you referring to the water source for the fire sprinklers?
Yes. No, the fire hydrant. There's a hydrant that's required.
Right. I don't know the particulars of that. I'm not prepared to speak to that specific point, but I believe this condition is general enough to require that the hydrant, the driveway, and any other fire service features the fire department would want were installed prior to construction. But staff wouldn't oppose if you'd like to clarify any aspect of that.
Okay.
Thank you. I just had a really quick question. Was there any reason to expect that the applicant's going to have any difficulty in securing the easement that's described in the conditions of approval?
I have no reason to believe that. Staff reviewed an initial written agreement between the property owner and the applicant to enter into the easement. It didn't meet the legal requirements and cannot be recorded at this time, but it's our understanding they have an amicable relationship and will be able to carry that out.
Okay, thank you. So, looks like we've exhausted questions.
One more question.
Oh, take it back.
One more question. So if we were to say, okay, you know what, I don't want to enforce the restriction of the 20 feet for the driveway. Go ahead and put in the driveway that you want. Item number 24 was that 2% cross slope. Is that even obtainable if we were to remove that exception?
Well,
I mean, there's no ADA access to that piece of property anyways, so.
So condition number 24, as I understand it, pertains to the driveway approach from San Pedro Avenue onto the site and ends essentially at back of sidewalk. For the vehicle access, the cross slope of the sidewalk running the length of the property frontage of the anchor in property, not the 2% going upslope to the site.
What does that have to do with him?
It's essentially, we're trying to tie up any access improvements that may occur prior to anchor in construction to conform with the same anchor in standards.
So there's no ADA requirement for that particular home up on that site? Once we get that far up the driveway, then there's no?
I'm not aware of any accessibility or ADA requirement for a private residence. It's not a public accommodation like a commercial operation that is required to have accessible features.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Stedging, did you have something else?
Are there any other pending projects on this lot or the adjacent lot by the same group of people?
I'm not aware of any. We have the 4 detached motel room anchor in project on the site fronting San Pedro Avenue. We have this project. There's a large vacant site to the east on the slope known as the Colt property. There's no application on file for that. There is an application on file for the site immediately to the north, referred to as 505 San Pedro. It's for a mixed-use commercial project with 1 apartment unit, I believe. But that's not, the names and applicants associated with that project are not the same as this project.
It probably says in here, is it called property ag or R1 or what is it?
I can check the zoning map. I
That's all
believe
right.
it's
I'll look.
R1.
I'll look while you're doing that. Thank you.
R1 HPD is my recollection.
All right. Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and take this opportunity then to, while people are looking at things, to go ahead and open the public hearing. And I think we will start with the applicant, as is our custom. You'll have 10 minutes or as much of 10 minutes as you think you need to address us with anything you'd care to share.
Sure. Good evening, Commissioners. Brian Brinkman, applicant for the project. We have a single-family home here that meets all the zoning requirements. I just want to touch on some of the items you guys had questions about. Regarding the easement, there has been a covenant of easement recorded already. Currently, the anchor in property and this property are owned by the same individual, so you can't record an easement on your own property. So once we get through this, the ownership will change and we'll be able to record the easement. We've recorded the covenant easement that has the wording for the easement in it. It just binds them saying that upon approval, this will get done. So as soon as we get approval from this, we'll go ahead and get it recorded. As for the fire hydrant, we're working with the homeowner now, or the owner of the adjacent parcel. The fire hydrant will be on this residential property, and they're planning for a 6-inch main to run up the driveway. There's a fire hydrant within their project they have to put on their site as well. So this would be an extension of that line up to this house. As for the driveway, considering the location of the property, we felt it would be good to have more parking up there, since anybody coming to visit the site, that's the only place they can park. Otherwise, down on San Pedro and have to walk up the access past the anchor in. And like Christian pointed out, there is an exception in the zoning code that allows for that, for the additional parking. Other than that, if you have any more questions, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Brinkman. It looks like actually someone's taking you up on your on your invitation right now. So Commissioner Clifford.
Yes, in terms of the impermeable surfaces up there,
Uh-huh.
is there any willingness on the builder's part to change some of those surfaces to permeable? It does seem to be quite a bit up there.
Yeah, I mean, he is open to potentially doing some of that. We have had a hydrology analysis done for a 100-year storm and provided, designed a drainage system to account for the runoff from the proposed, from the project as it stands now, to keep the water on site.
All of the water is not going to stay on site, right?
I'm sorry?
I say not all of the water can stay on site.
Correct. I mean, we have a detention system to retain the water from the patios and the roof.
All right, thank you very much.
Uh-huh.
Commissioner Stedging.
You mentioned the additional parking that might be present with the widened driveway at the anchor end. Do you have any sort of diagram that might show that, whether it's...
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what...
You mentioned the widened driveway might provide additional parking?
Yeah, I mean, right now we have the drive aisle that goes up the anchor end project, and then we have a 20-foot driveway that comes off that goes into the garage, and then it flares out. There's a storage area on the side, and it flares out so that you could park a car off to the side there.
Oh, but you're not suggesting there'll be additional parking on the driveway of the anchor end, correct?
Correct, nothing on that property, yes.
Okay, yesterday I took a look at the property and observed a green Dodge flatbed and a 1200 model skid loader looking what looked to be removing very large diameter trees. Do you have any idea what that might be?
I do not.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll just, I guess, hang close. There may be other questions as we move along. I don't have any speaker cards for this item. I'm going to interpret that as a sign that no one else has anything to add to the mix from the public. So we'll go ahead and close the public hearing aspect of the matter and bring it back to the commission. I guess that's Commissioner Cooper.
Yeah, I mean, I like the project. I think it's an attractive-looking building. I think it's located in the height's not too bad for me because it's up against the hill. I would like to see more permeable paving in the back. I don't think that restricting the driveway is a good idea. I think that I'm fine for him to make more parking in that area to allow more people to get up there. But I would like to see some permeable paving in the back. Maybe say that, hey, 75% of that back paving has to be permeable or something, just to let some water in the ground.
Commissioner Clifford?
Yeah, on the driveway, I would not have a problem with it being larger than 20 feet at this point. And as you could tell from my question, I am definitely interested in seeing more permeable material up there.
Commissioner Stedging?
I agree. I'd definitely like to see more permeable concrete. I'd like to make it clear that if we're widening the driveway, we're actually providing parking versus widening a driveway that later becomes another 3 units of a hotel. A month ago, we took away 5 to 8 spots directly across that street, and if you could provide parking for all your customers, that would be great. Thank you.
Any other comments or concerns? I guess, Commissioner Gordon.
Sure. I had a question for the applicant about that. Commissioner Cooper's suggestion that 75% of the surface in the back be made permeable.
Yeah, we can do the patio in the back, we can make that all permeable.
Perfect. Yeah, I would assume that you probably would want 3 feet outside the building to be a concrete slab, but then after that, you should.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, well, it sounds like we might be go ahead.
I just wanted to know how we would memorialize that in a motion, in terms of amending the motion, because it sounds like we just came up with some kind of quick agreement.
So
no?
perhaps if we ended up a motion, it would be conditioned upon a requirement that was it the patio area in the back? Is that what you were talking about, be at least 75% permeable surface?
Correct.
Okay. Well, I think a motion's in order, given where we are, if someone cares to make one. Commissioner Clifford.
Well, I'll make a motion moving that the Planning Commission find that the project is exempt from California Environmental Quality Act, approves coastal development permit CDP 381-16, and add the condition of 75% permeable surface to the patio.
Okay.
By adopting the attached resolution, including conditions of approval in Exhibit A with that addition, and incorporate all maps and testimony into the record by reference.
Okay, well, there's our motion. Commissioner Cooper?
I'll second the motion.
And Chair, if I could, to clarify, the motion is including removal of condition number 6?
6.
Yes.
That's been clarified, yes. Okay,
And
so-
we're talking about both patios and back as well.
Okay. All right, well, that's the motion, the second. I guess we can go ahead and take a vote on it. Okay, that carries unanimously, 6 votes to, none against. Thank you. All right, so that dispenses with item 1 under new public hearings, and we'll go on then to item number 2. And this is text amendment TA 11017, initiated by the Planning Commission to amend Articles 2 and 23 of Chapter 4 of Title 9 of the Pacifica Municipal Code to establish regulations for alternative financial services. The amendment to be considered would affect commercial properties in the C1, C1A, C2, C3, CR, O, and PD zoning districts. This, with respect to CEQA, is a general rule exemption, CEQA guidelines, section 15061. B3. The recommended action is adopt the attached resolution initiating the text amendment and recommending approval to the City Council. Could we get a staff report on this item?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Commissioners. Senior Planner Christian Murdoch. The ordinance before you would establish a numerical limit of 1 for alternative financial services, which include uses such as payday lenders and car title lenders and check cashing operations. The ordinance would also establish a conditional use, alternative financial services as a conditional use, with the requirement to obtain a use permit for lawful operation. The ordinance would make the 3 existing alternative financial services in Pacifica non-conforming uses, which means they may lawfully continue, but may not expand or relocate elsewhere in Pacifica. Additionally, if an existing alternative financial services business were to close for 12 months, it would not be able to reopen. Staff requests the Commission to initiate the text amendment and to recommend approval of the text amendment to the City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for staff with respect to this item? Commissioner Gordon?
Thank you for that staff report. Christian, just curious, so if an existing facility closes for 12 months, for at least 12 months, then they can't reopen, why the 12-month?
That's the period set forth in the city's non-conforming zoning regulations in Article 30 of Chapter 4 of Title 9. And so that's the standard applied to any non-conforming use. Should it cease for a period of 12 months or more, you cannot commence that use again on the site.
So we couldn't make that shorter here?
I would defer to the Assistant City Attorney for his legal opinion on that, but we've discussed previously and did not recommend that in the ordinance.
Yes, certainly you could make that shorter, but at the very least, there would need to be a rational basis for imposing a distinction as to the shortened non-conforming use restriction for this particular use as opposed to other uses. So it would be subject to a rational basis test, which is very deferential, but at the very least, there would need to be a particular reason why that would be done.
So, for example, detrimental impacts on the community.
That would be a plausible reason to do it. Given some of the issues that are addressed and discussed in the staff report, that would be supportable.
Okay, it just seemed like 12 months was a long time considering the circumstances. But, okay, so it sounds like we've got the flexibility to shorten that. I had another question, but I can wait till...
Go ahead, you got the mic.
Okay. Curious about the notice issues. We got a letter from, I can't remember who, like an industry representative saying that they didn't have sufficient notice of what was going on. I don't know what you guys' response was to that.
I think our response is we provided not only the minimum notice required by law, but notice in addition to that. We sent notice to the operators that would be subject to the ordinance, which I'm not aware is a legal requirement. And so we believe that we've exceeded the minimum, and by the very nature of their reaching out, they've confirmed that they've received the notice and are aware of the hearing. Beyond that, providing the materials in the proposed ordinance more than 72 hours in advance is not required.
Yeah, and on that subject, you know, notification of impacts to known operators is required because there is in the government code a provision that potential uses that are impacted be notified at the same time that notice of publication is made. That was complied with. Additionally, the Brown Act requires the minimum notice of 72 hours regarding the materials to be considered, and that was provided.
And so, and how much notice do the operators get? Do we know?
The operators were sent the notice 10 days prior to the hearing.
Okay. Okay, 'cause the letter that we received made it sound like they got it like Friday afternoon and blah, 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 but it doesn't sound like that's accurate.
No.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Clifford.
Want a follow-up question on the 12 months. Now, if they're closed for 12 months, but it's not through any fault of their own, it was not their intent to close, fire, flood, whatever, that created a situation where they were forced to close, would the 12 months still be applicable, or is there an exception?
I think we need to research that. I know there's provisions when a nonconforming structure is destroyed by an act of God, but we'll have to see if those same provisions apply to a use.
And my second question is, and I'm sure it's going to be directed to the lawyer, and that is can the existing businesses sell their business to somebody else and have it continue to run?
The answer to that would be clearly yes.
Okay.
The existing non-conforming uses provision allows non-conforming uses to continue, and that's a land use right, so that would transfer to the following owner.
Okay, thank you very much.
And Chair, if I could respond to the Commissioner's question about circumstances beyond the owner's control.
Please do.
One subsection of our nonconforming standards reads as follows: if a nonconforming use is discontinued for a period of 12 months, such nonconforming use shall not be reestablished. However, if the cessation of the use is caused by circumstances over which the owner has no fault or control, the time limits of this section may be extended by the Commission. Applications for such extensions shall be made in writing before the expiration of the 12-month period. The subsequent use of buildings shall conform with the zoning regulations and general plan designations for the district in which such use is located.
Thank you. Commissioner Cooper.
Yeah, I have two questions. The first question I have is, how many new operators have we seen in Pacifica in the last 12 months for AFS?
In the last 12 months, I'm not aware of any new operators.
Have we denied any permits in the last 12 months for AFSs?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Stedging.
I have read the record, and I visited two of the businesses. Just for the record, I'll say that I did first receive notice in the November 25th edition of the Pacifica Tribune. I did find these businesses to be clean, small, well-kept, resemble a bank or a small insurance office. I also checked with the city of San Mateo, which is roughly 2.5 times our size and has a limit of 4. So 3 certainly seems to be in keeping, or being more generous there. I'm curious, is in that ordinance, and I didn't see it, is there any limitation on owners owning more than one, or consolidation of 3 into 1 or something like that?
I don't think the ordinance addresses that particular point.
So I couldn't consolidate all 3, claim that as one business with branches, and open 2 more?
Given that each use requires, the ordinance as drafted would require each location to have a use permit. So in that instance, I think the answer to that would be no.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Gordon.
I just had a follow-up question from Commissioner Clifford's question. So an owner could sell to another owner and that would be, and that could sort of go on indefinitely and never count against what am I trying to say? There's three, you're allowed three under this proposed ordinance. I'm sorry, three are grandfathered in under the proposed ordinance, and those three could be kept open indefinitely as long as they were just simply sold and sold and sold to different owners. Is that right?
That's correct.
It seems like a kind of a loophole that kind of sort of subsumes the entire purpose of the ordinance. No? Is there any way around that?
Well, it's difficult for a city to apply a zoning ordinance to eliminate a lawfully established business at the time that a zoning ordinance is passed.
Right.
So,
I understand. That's why
however, provide an amortization period to discontinue a non-conforming use. So, provided that there's the opportunity for the business owner to recoup their investment, a ordinance could be passed that terminates the existing uses as they exist now.
And that was amortization you were suggesting?
Yes.
As at least a theoretical possibility?
Those are the lawful options available when considering terminating a non-conforming use.
So I had a question.
Or alternatively, the other option is paying just compensation for the termination of that business.
Thank you. I had a question I wanted to raise, because I've looked at this in context of my employment with the county, and one of the things we looked at was developing particular performance standards for existing uses like these, and to sort of specifically address some of the negative impacts that, like the ones you discussed in the staff report. And here I don't see any particular performance standards or any particular sort of conditions on sort of the actual land use we're talking about here. I was kind of curious about whether or not that was considered. I mean, because the only thing I actually see is a numerical limitation as opposed to anything that might address, I don't know, hours of operation, the way the businesses are set up, or what have you, to address some of the negative impacts, again, that we're talking about. I'm curious about the thinking there.
I'll address that point. The ordinance does require that any new uses, are conditional uses subject to use permit, so conditions could be imposed if appropriate to address particular impacts to that zone or to that use in that particular location.
Yeah. Well, I was interested, though, in the sort of the notion that we haven't identified any particular things that might, sort of flow specifically from these kinds of uses, which, again, I'm just a note, I'm a little surprised by that. Commissioner Stedging.
I have two questions. My first is I'm having difficulty envisioning any scenario where closing this business outside the 12-month relicensing period wouldn't be considered a public taking where we'd be on the hook for quite a bit of money. Is there any sort of attractive nuisance provision in the city code? Say there was a transfer to an owner that was completely irresponsible and not dissimilar to a bar that was out of control and abusing but keeping their liquor license, in which case we might.
I can't say I'm aware of any provision in the municipal code that would allow that. I am aware that certain cities have deemed such uses to be nuisances subject to abatement. Now, whether or not that falls within the city's power to prescribe under its police powers is a different issue. That wouldn't be a zoning ordinance. Our office has analyzed whether these things, whether that sort of approach would create takings issue, and we suspect that it might, so we're not recommending that approach be taken.
When I drive around and I see a wedding mall, you'll see one bridal store and other bridal stores. Assuming tomorrow all three locations, independent businesses, decided they wanted to be up in the Fairmont Center or whatever, would this ordinance allow that?
Bridal stores?
No. Say, the idea that similar businesses essentially increase the drive-by traffic, et cetera, assuming all three alternative financial services wanted to locate in the Fairmont tomorrow, say in the Fairmont Shopping Center, would this ordinance allow that? Hyper-concentration?
No. So if the ordinance were enacted, let's assume that it was in effect today, the 3 operators in existence in Pacifica would not be able to relocate without approval of a use permit.
Thank you.
And so at most, 1 would be able to locate in the Fairmont with approval of a use permit.
Commissioner Clifford.
Yeah, I want to be absolutely clear. If the commission decides to limit the number of payday lenders in the city to 3, does that mean we're limiting it to the ones that already exist, or are we limiting it to 3 additional on top of the 3 we already have? I want to be absolutely clear on that when it comes to voting.
So the recommendation is 1, and it's not 1 in addition to the 3 that are already there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. It looks like we've exhausted the lights for the moment, so I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearing. And I do, in this case, have some speaker cards, and go ahead and start with them in the order I've got them. So the first speaker will be Monica Sosa, followed by Pranita Sharma.
All right. Esteemed council members, planning committee, and guests, my name is Monica Sosa, and I used to be part of the Youth Leadership Institute, the same organization that is hoping to pass this ordinance. I worked with them in 2014, first being introduced to payday loans in high school, where we worked with both South San Francisco and Daly City, and had been told about these negative impacts. Thing is, 2 years later, I was in need of a job, and I was blessed with having an opportunity to work with Ms. Pranita Sharma at Check Cashing and Loans LLC, which, is a twisted fate. And in my mind, I had this misconception of what a payday loan was, and I was very skeptical. And when I went there to work, I believed exactly what the Institute had told me, that the people there were in debt, they were just frightened and they couldn't get out. But as soon as I sat on this chair and the people started coming in, they were happy. They were in desperate need of money, and the only place they could find some help was in these check cashing and loans place. They were people that we had worked with. We had already, looked through paperwork to make sure that they could pay for it and that they wouldn't be stuck in these loans. We followed laws and regulations in order to help these people. And in fact, instead of being a negative impact, we saw that we were more positively helping these people. And it was something that I hadn't come to, learn until I actually was there and learned about these. I saw people who needed to pay rent, to pay mortgage, to pay anything. And they had gone to banks, they had gone to other people, and since no one helped them, they had turned to us. And for us to actually help them, I realized that instead of looking at it at a negative outlook, it was indeed a positive thing, and people actually need us. And I hope you reconsider this ordinance and put the views of the people ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sosa. Pranita Sharma, and then we'll have Eduardo Gonzalez.
Good evening to all. My name is Pranita Sharma, business owner of Check Cashing and Loans, LLC, in Pacifica, California. We have been in business in the city of Pacifica for 9 years. I strongly know my business serves the needs of many customers who at times have economic stress and rely on these small dollar loans for food, diapers, rent, gas, prescriptions, car payments, utilities, etc., and emergencies that call at any time. They have alternatives, but often choose these small dollar loans as the best and most effective financial option. This product I provide is beneficial, safe, convenient for the citizens, and not provided by the banks. I fully ask this commission, why is my small business being penalized? Which members of the planning department or council have ever visited any of the 3 stores? I know for sure not mine. The factors determine there is an issue. How many written or phone complaints from the customers have been received? How many recent requests for a new license in the city of Pacifica? We believe none over the last several years. Is the city aware of the decreasing trend in the number of business statewide? The number of payday lending stores has dropped 12% in the last 4 years and 26% in the last 10 years. This trend is also a nation one. Summary, citizens should be afforded the freedom of choice or options and the very definition of the free market society we are. One license has, as per the proposed audience, certainly does not provide that. Current consumer advocate groups are asking the city to deal with non-existent problem. They are trying to scare the city of Pacifica with negative impact of citizens or my customers getting credit actually helps them meet their obligations and not negatively affect the community. Lastly, I would like to know if the planning department is aware of the effect of the new Consumer Financial Protection Bureau new compliance rules, which are slated to take effect in September 2019. This ordinance is unnecessary. At the minimum, should not move forward until this commission visits the businesses that will be affected and seeks citizens' input on credit access and needs. I therefore request it to be reconsidered and not moved forward to the City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sharma. Thank you. Eduardo Gonzalez, followed by Carolyn Jaramillo.
Hi, good evening. My name is Eduardo Gonzalez. I'm a coordinator with the Youth Leadership Institute.
And my name is Sebastian Strasser, and I do volunteer work for Youth Leadership Institute.
So we're here in support of the capping the payday lenders to 1. Sebastian's going to share about the process we went to in getting community support and getting a public opinion about, one, educating the community about the negative effects of payday lenders, and also seeing what the community already knew and their thoughts about these payday lending establishments.
And so essentially through our surveying of residents of Pacifica in places like the Lindenmar Shopping Center and other places to like just get public opinion about these institutions, what we found is that from asking Pacificans of if they know what payday lenders are and if they would support policy change in regards to these institutions, 78% of who we surveyed knew what they were, and nearly 88% of those surveyed supported policy change with payday lenders. And when we surveyed these people in regards to if they agreed if there was a correlation between the chronic debt of being of the institutions as well as the loan, taking out a loan, and then health effects when being in a cycle of debt with these institutions. Should I say it? Like essentially 69% agreed that there was correlation with diabetes, 81% with stroke, 83% with cardiovascular disease, and around 90% for hypertension.
So we came to the conclusion that payday lenders is also a public health issue. It affects the health of the community. Also given the circumstance that Pacifica is in, with a lot of insecurity financially due to housing. These payday lenders really get you in a cycle of debt, which really doesn't help the community, but really, influences the cycle of poverty, which majority oftentimes targets low-income communities. Because no credit is required, it's pretty easy for you to get a payday loan, which makes it difficult, to go to a bank. So that's why we're also giving out support cards with resources that also lead you to other resources other than payday lenders, like the Pacifica Resource Center that has a great program to help you avoid that debt cycle and get you into a savings account. And we also have copies for you all in case you're wondering and want to read more about the findings and recommendations we did of this year. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Yeah, my understanding is you'll go ahead and provide those documents to the planning department so we can have that as part of the record. Thank you. Carolyn Jaramillo, followed by Victoria Becker.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Carolyn Jaramillo. I'm a homeowner here in Pacifica, and I'm here tonight to support the payday lending ordinance. I think it is fair to the lending institutions, and I think it will help many low-income people in Pacifica, and it will also be no burden to the city. I was here at the City Council presentation that the youth leadership made about the payday lenders, and I want to commend them for their work on this. And again, I'm asking you to give your support to this ordinance. I think it's more than fair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jaramillo. Victoria Becker, followed by Deeg Gold.
Hi, my name is Tori Becker. I'm here tonight from Pacifica Social Justice in support of this ordinance about payday lending in Pacifica. I support this ordinance initiated by the Youth Leadership Institute to regulate payday lenders because of their long history of odious predatory practices directed at people who have limited access to emergency funds. Payday lending organizations that promote people getting further and further in debt are not the answer to the inequities in our society. And as Eduardo talked about, Pacifica Resource Center is a much better alternative. So again, I think it's important that the City of Pacifica listens to the Youth Leadership Institute. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Becker. Deeg Gold, followed by Liana Molina.
Hi, my name is Deej Gold, and I'm also a member of Pacifica Social Justice. We support this ordinance. Social justice and economic justice are inseparable. I don't have much to add to what the Youth Leadership Institute has published on this issue. I just want to say that the destruction of the social safety net and the high cost of living in the Bay Area creates an almost daily crisis for many people, and the mainstream financial institutions are not there to meet them, just as the people from the payday companies have said. But payday lending, which takes 15 cents out of every dollar that they lend every month, is not part of the solution, it's part of the problem. Although Pacifica has few options for regulating this industry, such as reducing the fees that they can charge because that's set by state law, the proposed zoning restrictions then seem an appropriate although it's a small step, and I think you should support this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gold. Liana Molina.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Liana Molina. I'm the Director of Community Engagement for the California Reinvestment Coalition. CRC is a statewide membership organization of over 300 nonprofits and public agencies who advocate for the right of low-income communities and communities of color to have fair and equal access to banking and other financial services. Since 2002, CRC has been involved in efforts to tighten regulation of payday lenders at the state level as well as in local cities. I'd like to convey our support this evening for the proposal to limit the maximum number of alternative financial services here in Pacifica. We think that the city is taking an important step in joining other jurisdictions across the region and the state in implementing policy to curtail the negative impacts of payday and card title lending. Many cities, including Oakland, San Francisco, San Jose, Sunnyvale, Menlo Park, Redwood City, and numerous others have passed similar ordinances that impede the proliferation of these businesses. And we think that this ordinance will help ensure that the city, it sends a message to residents that the city will take steps to enhance the quality of life here and protect both community and consumer interests. And by developing additional, by limiting the development of additional fringe financial outlets, you're advancing the goals of the commission to guide the city to make sound development decisions that will overall improve Pacifica. So we encourage you to recommend the passage of this ordinance to the City Council, and we don't think that this would adversely affect existing businesses. Rather, it would help contain these loans, which we know by restricting the availability, consumers don't use them as much. So, this would also help send a strong message to the state and federal legislature and regulators that this industry needs reform, which is something that, as you've heard, the city can't do, but is sorely needed. So with that, we encourage you to send this ordinance on to the council for approval, and we appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Molina. I don't have any other speaker cards, so I think that's it for public comment on the matter. I'll go ahead then and close the public hearing and bring the matter back to the commission for my colleagues. Commissioner Stedjink.
Is planning staff aware of any law enforcement activities at these AFS locations?
I don't know that we had a very thorough check for calls for service, but anecdotally through the police chief, these are not known to create a lot of calls for service in our community.
Are there any negative effects on existing AFS locations in Pacifica that might be responsible business owners?
I'm having a hard time with that question. So if the AFS is a responsible business owner?
One of the existing three.
Yes.
Are there any provisions of this ordinance that is going to reduce their net income, gross income?
Not that I am aware of, and I'll look to legal counsel as well.
Yeah, certainly, the ordinance grandfathers the existing businesses in at their existing level. They're prohibited from expanding without obtaining a use permit. But certainly that doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be an impact on their financial revenue in any sort of way.
Thank you.
Commissioner Clifford.
Well, I'm going to come out and say that I'm definitely in favor of this, recommending this ordinance. And quite frankly, I see this as a plus for the existing businesses. They're grandfathered in, and we would be essentially keeping them from having any additional competition.
Oh, interesting. Commissioner Gordon.
I hadn't thought about that. I'm also in favor of this ordinance. The staff report lists the various negative secondary impacts. I'm not going to review them here. At first I was thinking, this is really not going to do much since all the existing uses are grandfathered in, and they can sort of in perpetuity simply sell the business to a new owner, and you still are going to have 3 payday lenders in Pacifica. And then I was thinking, well, that may be, but the fact is that I know I think one of the owners said that payday lenders have decreased their new openings by like 12% recently, and that makes sense because economic times are really good right now. But I can foresee a time when the boom turn, the economic cycles turn, and things are going to be a little harder, and it'll be good that Pacifica has a cap of 3 payday lenders because there's probably going to be there would otherwise be a move to have more. So I'm in favor of the ordinance as written. I think it'll be good for Pacifica.
Commissioner Cooper.
Yeah, I had a question for you, and I have a comment for my fellow commissioners. But by just defining what an AFS is with the first part of this ordinance, does it affect anybody? Just by the definition of, hey, you know what? You're an AFS. This is how you define it. You can be in these commercial zones. Boom. Does that affect any of the current businesses that we currently have?
Not that I'm aware of. I'll defer to staff but the
They're all
zoning-
probably in a C1, C2, C3, CR, C1A.
Exactly.
commercial zone.
The ordinance essentially allows AFS in the same zoning districts as they were previously allowed when we didn't have a definition of banks or financial
Correct.
services.
Thank you. For me, I don't mind defining what an AFS is. I think it's always good to get definition around a certain business. I'm entirely against limiting free capital and free markets. I do not think that's my place on the Planning Commission, nor do I think that it's a way that we should be regulating businesses. Having a company and having people with low income and paying people with low income, sometimes people need that service. I think I will commend the speakers on these cards. I think these are great, but these cards are just as great as limiting lotto tickets at 7-Eleven or, alcohol or any other type of thing that puts these people into that predicament. There are plenty of people out there who use these loans, I think, for valid purposes, for decent purposes, to feed their families. We haven't had any new applications in the past 12 months. I don't know what people are so excited about that we're going to get this influx of AFS lending. That's just not the way the cycle is moving. That's not the way that money's moving. In my opinion, banking is becoming more electronic. I think it's great that we educate the public of where to get banking institution, but to regulate the fundamental areas where they can go to wire their families money or take an advance on payday loans. Some people need that. That's not for me to say, I think, as a planning commissioner and myself. So I'm entirely against the definition of limiting the AFS. I think the market will do that for them. Otherwise, we'd already have 50 AFS institutions here. Are people banging our door down? Hey, I want to be in Pacifica and get my AFS. I just don't see that happening. I think the economy regulates the market. So I'm more in favor of defining it, but I am not in a favor of capping it.
Thank you. Commissioner Stedjang.
I do agree with Tom Clifford that this does create an opportunity and an advantage for existing business owners, but I will state, while I'm in favor of this ordinance, it essentially creates an oligopoly within our walled garden of Pacifica, where a lack of competition could lead to higher prices for residents who do use these services, regardless of whether they're good for them or not. Thank you.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions and a comment or two myself. So I understood, based on a question I think that Commissioner Stedjang asked, that we don't really have significant police calls any different from anywhere else in the city related to these operations. Is that right?
That's our understanding, yes.
And I was just, again, sort of looking through the staff report and the sorts of kind of illustrative kind of impacts that are addressed. And, one is sort of negative impacts on neighboring land values and tax base. I'm actually pretty familiar with two of these three locations because they're close to where I live. And I was kind of curious about whether or not, it's staff's opinion that impacts on land values or tax base really flow from the particular locations we're talking about in this instance, or the places these things are likely to show up.
I mean, academic material has sort of suggested that there's a correlation as to how strongly that's tied. I think that's a matter for further academic research.
Well, I'm trying to draw a bridge between kind of the academic research and the reality on the ground as we experience it here. And then there was some comment about health outcomes in the community. I'm sort of curious about whether or not, I know we got some, polling feedback of what people thought about, possible health impacts of these kinds of businesses. I'm curious about whether or not the county health system or anybody else has looked specifically at Pacifica or maybe even more broadly the Bay Area and health impacts that flow from these kinds of businesses.
I haven't looked for such research, so I'm not sure if it exists.
Well, I have to say, I frankly was, very compelled by kind of the work that's been done around payday lending and sort of the notion of getting information out to people so that people are really kind of well versed on sort of the full range of alternatives that exist out there. But I have to say that I tend to agree with my colleague, Commissioner Cooper, that I think it's I guess the term that occurred to me is somewhat paternalistic to sort of go down the road of regulating in this particular area. I'm just not seeing that there are necessarily in the instance of Pacific anyway the kind of the strong correlation between some of the impacts that have been identified in the sort of academic literature and sort of the reality, again, that we're experiencing here. I think it's the kind of thing that we ought to be, sort of pushing every chance we get, sort of the full range of alternatives to payday lending so that people who frankly want to pursue a different and hopefully lower cost option are able to do it. But I do think that there are people who on occasion make use of these services, and I don't think that they necessarily ought to be regulated in the way we're proposing to here. So I'm not necessarily in favor of this particular recommendation. Commissioner Campbell.
I have actually some sympathy with that argument. And I think if we were regulating these businesses out of existence in Pacifica, I might be more concerned about that, because I do think sometimes people find themselves in desperate times, and you would rather have them go to a legal place like this to get the money rather than a loan shark or something illegal. But we are maintaining 3 of these in town, and so I'm less concerned at the moment. And I think as a public body, we do, I think it's okay to put caps on certain types of businesses. I know certain cities do that with liquor stores. I wish this much attention had been paid to cannabis dispensaries near high schools, but that's just me. So I'm okay with this, and I'd be willing to vote in favor of it.
Thank you, Commissioner Stedging.
I'm also okay with this, and I'd be willing to vote in favor of it. I would remind the staff and commission that the entire city survived for roughly 14 months with a single post office at the very southern edge of Lindemar. I don't have any doubt that all the existing AFS customers could successfully survive at one location. I've read the staff report, and I didn't see it. Is there anything in there that might indicate these locations are comorbid with the existence of other businesses the county or the state would consider vice locations, 24-hour liquor sales, tobacco sales, and/or lottery ticket sales?
So they are located in shopping centers that contain some of the businesses that you mentioned. Whether or not they actively seek those out because they want to be located near, or they want to be located near each other, I don't know.
Thank you.
I had one more question that occurred to me. So, a situation involving an existing business. There are 3 existing businesses, I understand, right now, and generally in commercial shopping centers. And curious about what would happen if one of those folks lost their lease and had to try to find another location, maybe in the city or maybe not. Under the ordinances drafted, that would be a cessation of an existing use, so they couldn't, for example, try to find another location without getting a use permit. Is that the way things are drafted right now?
Correct.
Is there any flexibility under the law for or a law that we might try to frame for being able to, in a situation like the one I just described, carry over that use to another location within the city?
That's not our recommendation, and that's not the way the ordinance is currently drafted.
I know it's not the recommendation, but I was asking about whether or not it could be done.
It could be done, but again, I think that would require a different cap. And
I think in that instance, the commission may want to consider a recommendation of a different cap.
Okay.
I think that's how I'd say, if that's what the commission wanted to do, the way to go about that.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Gordon.
Yeah, I'm ready to make a motion.
Go ahead.
Adopt the resolution included as attachment A, initiating text amendment TA-110-17 and recommending approval to the City Council, basically recommending the ordinance as drafted as recommended.
Thank you. Commissioner Stedging?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, a second. Why don't we go ahead and vote? Okay. Well, it's passed 4 votes in favor, 2 against. Commissioner Cooper and Niblin against. Thank you. All right, so that will take us to item number 3, and this is Development Plan DP 7514, rezoning RZ 19214, Specific Plan SP 14914, Transfer of Development Rights TDR 0314, Subdivision SUB 22414, removal of heritage tree and request for payment of fees in lieu of providing below-market rate housing units for construction of a 24-unit residential condominium project on a 53,627 square foot portion of an 11.2-acre site at 801 Fassler Avenue. Assessor parcel numbers 022-083-020 and 022-083-030. The recommended CEQA action is supplemental to the Environmental Impact Report, EIR, including adoption of a mitigated monitoring and reporting program, findings of fact, and statement of overriding considerations, and the recommended action is to approve as conditioned. I guess we'll go ahead and take a staff report.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Senior Planner Christian Murdoch. The project site is an 11.2-acre property located approximately a half-mile east of Highway 1, west of Seacrest Condominiums, and north of Fassler Avenue and the Harmony at 1 development. There's a vicinity map on the screen to help orient you and members of the audience. The eastern portion of the property is located in an area designated in the general plan as low-density residential, and a larger western portion, about roughly twice as large, is designated as open space residential. The entire property is zoned planned development with a Hillside Preservation District, or HPD, overlay. In 2007 and 2008, the Planning Commission and City Council approved a number of entitlements and legislative items, including a transfer of development rights, subdivision, specific plan, development plan, and a rezoning with a development plan to support development of a 29-unit residential project referred to as the Prospects Project on the western portion of the property. The property changed ownership in 2013. No building permits were issued for the Prospects Project, and in 2014, the entitlements for the Prospects Project expired. In 2014, the current applicant participated in a study session with the Planning Commission to discuss potential designs of a new development at 801 Fassler, and in late 2014, filed an application for the project set forth before you this meeting. The project consists of 24 condominium units in 12 duplexes. Most of the detached duplexes or duets would consist of 3 levels, and building heights would range from 31 feet 1 inch to 44 feet 5 inches. Each building has been designed using contemporary architecture, including flat and angular roof lines for visual accent and diversification. Building materials would consist of cement plaster, fiber cement siding, cultured stone, and metal awnings and rails. In addition to the residential units, the project would include a butterfly and hummingbird garden, an upper and lower picnic area, other open space areas, and a footpath consisting of decomposed granite that would provide a connection between the open space areas and the western portion of the residential development. The proposed project would be developed generally within the same building footprint as the Prospects Project. The project development area consists of 53,627 square feet, which is within the 11% maximum allowable development area of the site due to the Hillside Preservation District overlay. The grading plan for the proposed project includes approximately 9,000 cubic yards of cut and 19,100 cubic yards of fill. The amount of fill imported to the site would be approximately 10,100 cubic yards. This site access would be provided by one vehicular entrance via Fassler Avenue, connected to a private circular driveway that would interconnect the at-grade garages for each unit and the 15 surface parking spaces. The applicant has requested approval of several entitlements and legislative items for the project, including a new development plan and rezoning authorizations, which are the legislative items, as well as adjudicative items, which include a specific plan, transfer of development rights, and a subdivision of airspace for condominium purposes. Staff has recommended approval of the applicant's proposals as conditioned in the draft resolution of approval, with the exception of the applicant's request to pay a fee in lieu of construction of below market rate housing units, or BMR units. The Pacifica Municipal Code requires the project to include 4 below market rate units, which is 15% of the number of units proposed. The applicant has requested payment of an in lieu fee rather than construct the BMR units on site. However, staff finds that this alternative would not meet the greatest community need at this time. The establishment of below market rate units at the project site would provide the community with sorely needed affordable housing that would also contribute to the city's regional housing needs allocation of 413 units between 2015 and 2023. As of the end of 2016, the city had approved or preserved only 7% of its regional housing needs allocation across all income levels. To evaluate the environmental impacts for the project, the city engaged the firm WRA to conduct an environmental review of the project in accordance with the California Environmental Quality Act. Jeff Riley, Senior Associate Environmental Planner from WRA, will discuss the environmental review conducted for the project as soon as I just make it through a couple more slides. This slide here shows roughly the area designated as low-density residential, this area open space residential, and the requested transfer of development rights, which would enable this development, transfers the density from the sending parcel to the receiving parcel. The open space residential parcel is only eligible for construction of 1 unit under the general plan. However, the low-density residential has a maximum density of 32 units.
Thank you, Mr. Murdoch. Again, I'm Jeff Riley. I'm a senior project manager with WRA, and WRA was hired to prepare the environmental impact report, the supplemental environmental impact report for the proposed project. Tonight, I'm going to go over a little bit about the California Environmental Quality Act, for those that may not be familiar with that, as well as the CEQA process. CEQA is short for California Environmental Quality Act. The general definition of an EIR, why a supplemental environmental impact report is the appropriate document for this project, and I'll give a brief overview of the impact analysis in the draft EIR, as well as the alternatives, and then lastly, give you just a brief overview of the final environmental impact report. Also here with me tonight is Mr. Bruce Abeli Amen of Baseline Environmental Consulting. He's the EIR geologist and hydrologist, and Mr. Bob Grandy, he's a senior or principal traffic engineer from Fair & Piers, the city's on-call traffic engineer. So let's talk a little bit briefly about the environmental impact report and what is an EIR. It's a public information document that's required to identify any significant physical environmental impacts of a given project, and also recommend what are called mitigation measures to avoid or reduce such significant impacts. And I'll go over some of those significant impacts shortly. EIRs are required to look at what's called cumulative impacts, the project in conjunction with other past, present, or reasonably foreseeable future projects. And Chapter 3 of the draft EIR, or supplemental EIR, includes a map and a list of all those projects considered, including the project across the street, the Harmony at 1. The EIR is also required to look at what's called growth-inducing impacts. And lastly, a cornerstone of the report is alternatives. An environmental impact report explores alternatives to reduce or avoid significant impacts of the project. So what's the purpose of the environmental impact report? First and foremost is to satisfy the CEQA requirements. And it informs the general public, decision makers like the Planning Commission and City Council, of the significant environmental effects, if any, and mitigation measures and alternatives, as I mentioned. It allows the city to also consider these impacts before considering approval of the project. And it's also lastly used by permitting agencies to issue permits, in this case, perhaps possibly the Army Corps of Engineers. So the concept of a supplemental draft environmental impact report, let me go over that a little bit. Mr. Murdoch mentioned the previous analysis done in 2004 for a larger project of 34 dwelling units. The proposed project is smaller, 24 units. It's with the same development envelope as proposed previously. So it has less units, fewer square feet, and hence the city determined that a supplemental environmental impact report would be the appropriate vehicle, if you will, or environmental document. And supplementals are required when minor additions are made to the previous approved projects, and that the changes are necessary to make the previous EIR adequate. It's required the same amount of public review and noticing as the original EIR, and at a minimum, it needs to address the changes between the two projects. For example, the proposed project no longer includes subterranean parking. That's one difference, for example. There were some comments at the beginning of this process that suggested or expressed concern that this is not minor changes. But I want to assure you that this environmental report addresses not only the changes between the two, but all aspects of the project. And recent case law has found that it's not so much the title of the EIR, it's the content. So I assure you that all aspects of the project are addressed fully. So a little bit about this process. As some of you may know, it starts off with what's called a notice of preparation. You tell the public and the agencies that you're going to prepare an EIR. And we also held, that happened in October of 2015. We had a public scoping meeting in October as well for the same purpose, to allow people to come up and express, and agencies, what they'd like to see in the environmental impact report. And the notice of prep also includes what's called an initial study checklist. It's 18 environmental topics ranging from agricultural resources to traffic. And what that does is the initial study, it did two things. It confirmed that an environmental impact report was appropriate and not a mitigated negative declaration. And it also helped scope the contents of the report and weed out, if you will, environmental topics that aren't applicable, such as agricultural resources. The site does not contain prime soils, for example. We looked at those letters and responses, if you will, the input at this meeting, to carefully craft the content of the draft EIR. We had a public review period for this draft after the city vetted the document several times, and it was revised per their comments from June 7th through the 24th of July. And the purpose of that public review is to allow the public and relevant agencies like Caltrans and Fish and Wildlife, for example, to comment on the adequacy of the environmental documentation. We also held a project meeting, a public meeting in June, late June, at the community center in town. Unfortunately, no one showed up and no written comment letters were submitted at that meeting. Excuse me. So this is a flow chart of the process, and you may not be able to read all of it or any of it, or I can't really, but I can memorize some of it. It starts with determining, you do the initial study to determine if the EIR is required, and you get to the notice of preparation stage in the left button, or bubble here, and then you have at the lower left here is the scoping meeting. And then we're here now, this is where I'm in my presentation, the draft environmental impact report, to be followed by a 45-day review period. That's mandated by state law. We actually had 48 days. And then you get into what's called the response to comment phase that feeds the final environmental impact report. And the last bubble shows what's called a certification hearing. So we're here tonight with the Planning Commission. There'll be future meeting with the City Council on the project as well. That's a little bit of just the flow of the process, if I may. So, you know, as I mentioned, we relied a lot on the original EIR, but we had to update some studies to, particularly traffic. Some of these studies don't change over time, like geology, for example, but we updated things like new visual simulations and biological resources and hydrology, to name a few. And then the EIRs use the phrase significant when necessary, and we also rely on what are called thresholds of significance to determine, is a project impact significant. Air quality and traffic are good examples. They have quantifiable thresholds. Other thresholds are more qualitative. But so we use these definitions here to identify the level of impact significance. And the first is just less than significant. You don't meet that bar, that threshold of significance. It's less than significant. Then the next one is less than significant with mitigation. You exceed that threshold of significance, but you can put it down or below the threshold with feasible mitigation measures that the applicant is agreed and willing to implement. And then lastly is the significant unavoidable impact, where you exceed the threshold, but you can't get it below that standard, and it remains unavoidable. The project does have a few of those impacts that I'll describe shortly. So this is just a list, an example of all of the less than significant impacts after mitigation that we found, ranging from aesthetics, or light and glare, excuse me. AES stands for aesthetics. Bio stands for cultural resources. It gives you a flavor of the types of impacts that we found that could be fully mitigated to less than significant levels, including geology as well and cultural resources. And then, as I mentioned, the unavoidable impacts. Due to the site location along Fossler, which provides views of the ocean, city protected views, We found that the project, even with mitigation, resulted in significant unavoidable impacts to scenic vistas, scenic resources, and visual character, and also a short-term noise impact during construction that would exceed the ambient standard or the existing ambient noise level. So when you have a significant unavoidable impact, as you may have read in the findings in the staff report, the city must adopt what's called a statement of overriding considerations that basically weigh the benefits of the project over the significant and unavoidable impacts. Now, I mentioned one of the cornerstones of EIRs are alternatives. They're kind of like mitigation measures. You're required to, look at or explore alternatives that reduce or avoid the significant impacts of the project while still meeting the basic objectives of the project too. So we don't look at alternatives for an industrial project, for example. That doesn't meet the applicant's objectives. And the goal is what you do is you compare and contrast the significant impacts of the alternatives to those of the project. And that's the list. I'll go into each one briefly here. The no project is alternative A. And CEQA requires you look at this. It's basically no construction, site remains undeveloped, and you just continue the existing conditions, including other related projects in the area. And as intuitively, that generally results in the least amount of impacts. And then the redistribution of units alternative. And what this would do, it would not grant the transfer development right request, and it would maintain the existing zoning. You saw the map earlier where the west end is zoned for, or 7.6 acres is zoned for 1 dwelling unit per acre, and the eastern side is 3 to 9 dwelling units per acre. This alternative would maintain those general plan designations, and all the buildings, virtually all of them, would be clustered on the eastern portion of the site and not the western. So you'd have some circulation modifications there as well. This one's pretty straightforward, alternative C, 50% reduction, so it's down to 12 units. It increases some of the outdoor areas, and actually it was determined to have the fewest environmental impacts. The last alternative is the reduced height alternative. We received comments during the NOP phase about heights, building heights, and we felt that it was important to look at an alternative that addressed the project's exceedance of city height standards. And so this concept includes only 2-story buildings, maximum of 35 feet, but you still have the total 24 units, and generally the same amenities and circulation and the like. Now, lastly, for alternatives, CEQA requires that we choose an environmentally superior alternative. And typically, as I said, it's a no project, but if it is, you have to choose the next. And so based on the analysis in the draft EIR, we found that the reduced density project alternative would result in the fewest or least amount of significant environmental impacts. And then finally is, the final environmental impact report process. During the 48-day review period, again, we didn't have anyone at the meeting that we held, but we did receive 2 comment letters, and those are addressed in Chapter 2 of the final EIR. And as you see on the slide there, the final's broken out by Chapter 1's the introduction. The heart of it is really Chapter 2, response to comments. And then 3 is if you have any corrections and additions to the draft, you show them there. And one other cornerstone of CEQA that didn't start at its inception is what's called Mitigation Monitoring and Reporting Program. And that's because sometimes mitigations weren't being implemented. And what this does is it lists all the mitigation measures required of the project and identifies who implements them, when, and the enforcement, and so forth. So it allows the city to really ensure that all mitigation measures are being implemented. So out of the 2 letters, the themes in those 2 letters were traffic impacts, cumulative impacts, questions about the impact significance criteria used for traffic, and as you could see, a couple more there, building heights and scenic, to name a few. I wanted to point out, though, that as a part of responding to these comments, no new significant impacts were identified, and hence, there's no new significant information that the public was denied to see. Thus, there's the recirculation of the draft EIR is not warranted. And there we get back to the flow chart with just showing us at the very end with Planning Commission today. So that concludes my presentation. We're here to help answer any questions you may have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. So to close, staff believes the project would contribute significant improvements to the area, including preserving lightly disturbed open space, reducing the lack of pedestrian facilities on the north side of Fassler by installing a new sidewalk, and contributing much-needed market rate and below-market rate housing to the city's inventory as encouraged by the housing element of the general plan. Lastly, staff has provided the commissioners with all public comments received prior to the hearing, and staff has placed copies of these comments at the rear of the council chambers. Staff recommends adopting the attached resolution, which includes approving the specific plan, subdivision, and transfer of development rights, entitlements as conditioned, recommending to City Council adoption of an ordinance rezoning the property with the development plan, certifying the CEQA document and adopting the associated findings and mitigation measures, including the statement of overriding considerations, and denying the request for payment of a fee in lieu of construction of below-market rate housing units. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murdoch. It looks like we have a couple of clarifying questions and comments before we move to public hearing. So I'll start with Commissioner Clifford.
Okay, I have a couple of questions for the person who developed the environmental impact report and the supplemental. You were involved in both projects in terms of the environmental reports, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Can you tell me how much fill was going to be required for the Prospects project?
That project included a subterranean garage, as I mentioned, and as a result, it allowed it to be balanced on site, the grading.
So there was no off-site fill as part of that project?
Correct.
Okay. And then my next question is, in terms of the traffic impacts, when I was rereading all of the data, I had a real problem with the loss of one lane going west during commute hours. The traffic already can and does back all the way up to Crespi when you have the access of 2 lanes for the cars to go through there. And I have no idea what's going to happen if we have an incident on Highway 1 and you don't have at least an availability for that second lane of traffic there by your project or by the project. So I see that, in my opinion, the traffic impacts are lacking in the
Okay.
supplemental.
If I may, I'm happy to have Mr. Grandy help explain it. We discussed that topic this morning a little bit, him and I. May I have him address that?
That would be fine.
Thank you.
That's why I asked earlier about this.
Bob Grandy with Fair and Peers. So in the final supplemental EIR, there is a note which indicates that the striping on Fassler, currently what happens is that the 4-lane to 2-lane transition occurs right at about where the project driveway would be. And the previous proposal had a drop in the westbound lane prior to that. But in the final supplemental EIR, there's a note that the striping has been changed so that the westbound or downhill 2 lanes will remain as they are. In order to do that, the uphill lanes, which will have a left turn into the project and a single lane going uphill, that taper going uphill, which now occurs at about the same point uphill as the downhill widening to 2 lanes, would be shifted downhill a little bit. In other words, that transition from 2 to 1 uphill lanes would occur a little bit sooner, about 400 to 500 feet sooner. That would allow the 2 westbound or downhill lanes to stay as they are, and maybe the applicant could confirm that, but that's, as I read it in the final supplemental EIR, that has been modified between the draft and the final. So the short answer is the 2 downhill lanes will remain as they are with the revised striping. And I could give you that.
Are they they're not the same width as they originally were, though. 'Cause I'm seeing 18 feet here now, and before they were larger than that, because you've got a 12-foot lane here for the left turn lane.
I believe they would retain, there would be two 12-foot lanes coming downhill, but I don't,
Well, if you've only got 18 feet, that's not possible.
well, there's 48 feet curb to curb, so right now you've got two 12-foot lanes down, roughly. So there's two downhill and two uphill lanes.
Do we have a picture of the map that we can put up on the screen that covers that area? That's not what I'm seeing here.
Lanes. Clifford's right, there's one downhill and two uphill. But that's what it shows in the plans. Commissioner Nipper, would you like me to show you?
That's the only map you've got. You don't have a page, whatever it is, sheet C7? Okay, well, that doesn't help.
So they've never changed it.
I am,
Behind it to accommodate. They've never made a change since the original plans that are
So
shown
the
there.
plan is issued.
this is, you have your left turn lane going up, you've got, which is marked at 12 feet. You have an 18-foot going up, and then you have one 18-foot wide lane going downhill, as far as I can see,
So
based on C7.
that's there, that's our.
There's your left hand.
I think that's the restripe now.
But, I mean, that's still only 18 feet from here to here. That's two 9-foot lanes if you're going to.
Okay, so just to make sure we're not sort of sidebarring it here, I just want to make sure I'm tracking kind of or that we're all tracking together what the question is at this point. I know we were trying to just get clarity on the
Let him, this is what he's.
widths of the lane. Did you want to kind of restate for folks what we're trying to nail down at this point?
So maybe if I could clarify, we've had a
Thank you.
chance to take a look at the latest version of the plans, and in fact, the two-lane downhill section you're referring to, which currently begins about at the project driveway, will be shifted about roughly 600 feet downhill. So, but the distance between State Route 1 and that point at the current.
All right, it's going to be shifted 600 feet downhill. How many car lengths is that?
That's roughly 20 car lengths. The distance between the proposed driveway and State Route 1 is about 2,800 feet.
I am seeing that there is going to be an impact on commute traffic by removing that many lanes. And I do think that it hasn't been studied and isn't addressed. So I may be wrong, but I think it needs to be studied. I think it needs to actually have some real data, not you and me conversing about it and me thinking there is an impact because I go down that road, and you thinking because you're a traffic expert that it isn't an impact.
I understand. The critical element of the delay going downhill is that signal down at Route 1.
And also anything that might happen, not just at that signal, but the following signal going north, and anything that might happen in between those two.
So what we're...
I'm just saying that we already have a problem, and I think that this is going to make it worse. I'm not going to try to pronounce that word correctly, but it's not going to make things better to lose that lane for 600 feet. And that's where I'm at on this question. And I would like to have that actually studied and somebody come back to me with some actual data on that, not just...
Okay. So currently, that second lane that is added is 2,800 feet from State Route 1, which is the signal downhill. It's a little over half a mile. The modification would move that from 2,800 to 2,200 feet, which is a little under half a mile, but quite a distance up the hill from the traffic signal. And shifting that two-lane section that from 2,800 to 2,200 feet, which is, like I said, just under half a mile, the critical element is still going to be the signal down at the bottom of the hill and the number of lanes that you have there and how that traffic signal operates. So reducing the number of lanes isn't going to affect the delay down at the signal and the ability to make that right turn in the morning.
What I see it affecting, and I want to be clear on this so that you're clear where I'm coming from, is what I see it affecting is more cars standing further up into the actual neighborhoods and idling, so that the actual air in the neighborhoods that already exist will be less clean because there isn't room for these cars down here where there's actually a breeze off the ocean.
Okay, I understand, but...
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Gordon. I'm sorry, Commissioner Campbell.
All right, I've got a question for staff. So in 2007 and 2008, when I was here to approve the last iteration of this project, yikes. One of the critical elements was open space preservation of 7 acres on the east parcel side with the conservation easement. Did that ever happen? Does it still exist?
I am not aware that a conservation easement was recorded on that site.
Okay, so that's, I'll discuss that later, but that was a big deal at the time. Another issue, I wasn't going to bring up traffic, but kind of see where Thomas is going. Actually, if I could, I just want to understand the analysis, the traffic analysis that was done. I see it in the supplemental EIR. And let's see. I just lost my place. Just thought I had it in this table.
I have a couple questions.
Okay. On the table, when it's talking about traffic, it's on, for those who want to read along, it's page 4-32. Project access and circulation impacts are considered to be significant but can be reduced to a less than significant level via implementation of mitigation measure traffic 1A. And so I go to mitigation measure traffic 1A, and that is talking about adequate sight distances. But not necessarily anything beyond that. So I'm just wondering how the adequate sight distances mitigate for circulation impacts. And just correct me if I'm not quite getting the full impact of
Can you
this.
cite the page number, the EIR again?
Sure. So page 4-32 is where it says, under the environmental impact column.
Thank you. So that chapter is what's referred to as impacts found to be less than significant. And what it's doing is it's referring to mitigation measures in the core chapter of the traffic section, which is chapter V, point F, if you will. The measure that you described does indeed deal with the ingress and egress, particularly sight distance. And so when one's currently coming out of the driveway and looking to the east, you have to move your car forward into the travel lane in order to provide adequate sight distance. So there's not enough adequate sight distance because of a tree there and the slope, and those are the prescribed mitigations to either shave the slope and or remove the tree. And so that does relate to ingress and egress, and particularly, and this is required before construction starts, so that trucks coming in and out hauling the soil will have that sight distance availability as well. Now, there are other measures in the traffic section that there's another separate mitigation measure, and there's a slight chance maybe that that number was misstated in the EIR, and it could have referred to 1B, but I'm using the summary table at the front here. It's a little snapshot, if you will. And yeah, for example, one other measure is 1B, and it prohibits parking along both sides of Fossler. And perhaps to partially address Commissioner Clifford's comment, is that there will be 18 feet lanes there, and it could encourage parking, which is a mitigation measure to prohibit that on each side.
Okay, I was just searching for something that might have dealt with Commissioner Clifford's.
We did evaluate level of service at 3 intersections: the project driveway on Fassler, State Route 1 and Fassler/Rockaway Beach, and State Route 1 and Reina Del Mar. So we looked at the impacts of project traffic on those 3 intersections. We found that given the trips generated by the project, they would not trigger the city's level of service threshold, impact threshold, which is that you would increase the volume to capacity ratio by 0.01 or more. So in the case of all 3 intersections, we found that the impact was less than that increase of 0.01 in volume to capacity ratio, and therefore it did not trigger an impact, and therefore it was identified as less than significant impact for traffic at those 3 intersections.
And what's the level of service is at Fassler and Highway 1?
It's F.
It's F. Yeah.
Existing and F in cumulative.
So this isn't going to make it beyond F. You don't get an F minus on that.
It will add traffic.
Yeah.
It would definitely add traffic. The additional traffic would increase that volume to capacity ratio by less than 0.01.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Stejink.
I've got quite a laundry list of questions here. My first one specifically for the city attorney. In the most recent SB 35 legislation passed a month and a half ago by the governor, and I'm going to read a little section from it here, and you can tell us how it might apply to Pacifica. Basically, it says that it's that any city that hasn't met their housing element is going to be subject to ministerial control. In the 2015-20 to 2023 housing element, we essentially lost 93 low-income units in a single month when Pacific Skies Estates closed. I'm curious if there's any way that the city can negotiate with the HCD, since they technically have had dominion over that, to remove those from our housing element?
And that would be something that we'd have to really look into.
Okay, I checked with the HCD today and took a look, and I couldn't find any other cities that had gone negative during that period in their housing element. I would suggest that if the state is looking for an example, we would be primed to be under ministerial control in San Mateo County, if not in the entire state. I did take a look at the traffic analysis. I took a look specifically at the intersection between Harmony at 1 exit and this location, and I sat there for a couple minutes and watched. I would suggest that might be a location for a traffic light. I sat there with an old K-band radar and didn't have any problem clocking several cars over 65 miles per hour in less than 15 minutes. And I'd also note that what Harmony at 1 has built does not actually represent the exit right only, left right in, right out at that location, and that I observed several cars, large vehicles, doing a U-turn around that slightly diminished curb extension. Essentially, the diagram makes it look like all traffic is tobogganed by force north up the hill when it's quite easy for cars to turn left there. I received a public comment letter from an individual named Leo Leone specifying there was a wildlife corridor relative to Harmony at 1 that would be affecting this. And I'm curious if either Fish and Game or even the USDA might subject us to sanctions if we ignored that wildlife corridor.
Well, I think we can have the CEQA consultant speak to what the biologics section's findings were, but I will also say that through the regular CEQA process, Fish and Wildlife is provided an opportunity to comment on our documents. And I don't believe we received a comment from them, but I will let Jeff discuss that.
Thank you. Again, Jeff Riley for the record, WRA. So Impact Bio 4 in the Environmental Impact Report does address wildlife movement, and it kind of combines it with also discussion of migratory corridor, and native wildlife nursery sites. But the project has conditions to not include fencing beyond the limits of the buildings themselves, and does not, so no fences can be allowed in the open space areas, and should not result in an unavoidable impact to wildlife movement corridors with the clustering of the buildings as proposed.
Thank you. My final question is regarding the statement is regarding the community design elements on page 26 of the city's general plan, and I'm just going to read it aloud here. When determining level of development, the city shall consider views of the ridgelines from the bay side of peninsula as well as from the Pacifica side, and essentially said that the ridgelines and views thereof should be protected elsewhere in the document also. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions. One of the questions is open space. There was an email, I think, that was sent to us in regards to access to the open space areas and the trails from the sidewalk areas, and that would be specifically from the north properties that are to the north. I think one of the interesting parts about Pacifica is to be able to enjoy its beauty rather just from the street. You could take that trail and go from the side. Was there any provisions done to access that trail besides from internally into your complex?
I think that perhaps we may want the applicant, when they do their presentation, to address that question.
The other question I had, mostly for staff, as I was noticing through some of the other cities and counties that there was a provision for a density bonus for residential development, specifically for condominium complexes. Was that taken into account in the RMU calculations?
The applicant did not request a density bonus.
And the other comment I had really is kind of a follow-up to Commissioner Clifford's comment is your traffic plan seems to have some areas which I would have concern. I certainly think that the left-handed turn up on Fassler is asking for a 65-mile-an-hour collision, someone coming down the hill. And I do like the way that Harmony at 1 is done there, is where you provided only a left and a right-hand turn depending on where you're going. So it forces the people to take the long way around, but I think from a safety standpoint that would do. The other element is that you have you have a 19-foot lane on your downswing from Fassler to an 18-foot lane after your turn lane. It seems like you'd create a head-on collision there by a foot. I know it's a double yellow line on that side, but that's something you might want to look at when you look at it. I was just wondering if you had submitted that. And then also for staff, we've requested and I know this is part of the comments when we reviewed this earlier, a sidewalk in the entire frontage of that property. Where does the sidewalk go? There's no sidewalks into the complex, and there's no sidewalks anywhere else. So was that taken into account? I mean, what did the sidewalks serve?
So Ray Dungeness from our engineering division is here, and he can address your question.
Okay. Thanks for coming, Ray.
Good evening, Commissioner Raymond Dungeness with the Pacifica Engineering. Per our complete streets policy, we do have to require the construction of the sidewalk. Although there is no sidewalks currently to either side of this property, we still need to require it. There is, I don't believe that the sidewalk go into the property, so we can address that if that's a possibility from the applicant.
Okay. The other question I had is this: it's a private drive as you go in here and go around. Is there room for someone if they wanted to visit? There's parking spaces in front. I would assume it's for the open space areas to do a turnaround and go back out the complex. I mean, or do they have to go around the entire thing before they exit?
I'm not aware of any public parking to visit the site and go into the trail. So.
Okay. So I guess a question for staff then is that is this entire open space just for the condominium complex or for this complex, or is it for the public?
It is not being dedicated as a public park. How the HOA intends to maintain it or allow access to it, I think the applicant can speak to that.
Can they restrict use to only the people that live within their complex?
I think they could theoretically.
That's all the questions I have for now. Thanks. Thank you, Ray.
Thank you.
Ray,
Commissioner Gordon. Commissioner Gordon.
Thank you, Chair. So my first question is directed to either staff or to the consultants, really whoever could answer it. And it's about the two parcels, the eastern parcel and the western parcel. I'm curious, they're contiguous, but yet they're zoned differently. One's in the general plan, one's open space residential, right, and one's low density residential. And I'm just curious, what was it about, if anybody knows about the topography or the location, or why were they? I mean, they're right next to each other. Why are they zoned differently and under the general plan? I'm open to anybody knowing.
I don't have the history, but Commissioner Clifford is signaling that he may.
I can answer that question. I was on the Open Space Committee and am fairly familiar with the Open Space Task Force report. And their intent when they divided those two parcels as they are divided was to keep buildings, any additional building up towards where there was already building, and leave the view corridor as the residential open space, which would allow for one building on that site. That was the thinking. That was how the report was read. And in terms of the density transfer, I'm going to add that I have a little bit of concern about we're preserving open space by putting something on open space in using the density transfer, which was an issue that came up originally when the first project was before the commission.
Okay, so if I can summarize, the two issues were a desire to make the future residential area contiguous with the already existing, what's the name of that? Seacrest.
Seacrest.
Okay.
Or Seaview.
Seaview. And the other was that they wanted to maintain the openness of the view corridor from the lower parcel.
They wanted to, because it's considered part of the scenic view, the Highway 1 scenic view.
Have there been any renderings about the impact on that scenic view with respect to the proposed development?
Yes, there are renderings, and I believe they'll be in the applicant's presentation as well.
Awesome, but we haven't received them yet. Are they in our application? Are they in our packet anywhere?
I believe they were part of the aesthetic section of the EIR.
Of the EIR, okay, great.
Does the public get a chance to make comments, or you?
Yes, sir, we'll get to that. Thank you. We're just wrapping up with a few questions. Commissioner Clifford.
I had a question for Ray from engineering, if he could come back.
Evening.
Good evening, Ray. My question, and it's due to reviewing the conditions of approval on this project. I noted that one, the project is estimating that they're going to have between 9 and 17 heavy trucks. Some, if it's a 20-yard truck, which would be the 9 trips. And that's one way, so it's actually going to be 18 trips, because the truck still weighs quite a bit, even if it isn't loaded, going from the Fassler light to the project and then back down again. I noted that you didn't have any kind of a condition that if that stretch of Fassler was damaged, that they would be responsible for repairing it. And I thought that that was sort of a usual thing with other projects, that if the road is damaged due to whatever the developer is doing, then they have to repair it.
I believe it's condition number 36 on the resolution. It's talk about curb, gutter, and sidewalk and other improvements adjacent to the property.
But that adjacent to the property doesn't go all the way down to Fassler, and they're all the way down to Highway 1, and that's where their trucks are coming.
Yeah, we could, with
I think that condition should be corrected so that it takes into account that there might be damage. That road right now is okay, but probably a little marginal, and I would hate to see this project to be completed and then have a terrible road for all of the rest of the residents.
We could possibly revise that to make it more clear to that portion of Fassler to be included in the condition of approval.
I would certainly like to see that. Yeah. It may not have any impact at all. The trucks may not cause any problem, but I want the city and the residents to be protected in that area.
Yes, so yeah, that condition is a little broad, it says adjacent to the property, so which could possibly lead to all the way to Highway 1.
I don't like that word possibly.
Okay, right. we could revise it with the commission's.
You could change that condition to reflect what I'm asking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Gordon.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Chair. I had a question for the consultant again. In light of what I understand is the sort of the history behind the two parcels and why they were zoned differently. And I'm going through the EIR, the draft EIR, supplemental EIR, and I'm looking at the significant unavoidable impacts on the scenic vistas. And I'm thinking to myself, well, the whole purpose of zoning them differently was to preserve the vista on the lower parcel and to make contiguous the development on the upper parcel with already existing. And the density transfer kind of upends the policies behind the general plan zoning. So there must be some significant, and I understand there's trade-offs with everything, and I understand there's probably a ledger where you've got, well, on the one hand, going with alternative B, where you've got the development on the upper parcel. On the one hand, yeah, great, that lessens the impact on the scenic vistas, but on the other hand, there's something on the other side, and I guess I want to hear from you guys what you saw in that other ledger that outweighed the fact that by putting it on the upper parcel, you could, keep the developments contiguous, preserve the view corridor, blah, 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 blah. I just want to sort of go with you and understand what the thinking is and get my little ledger down.
That's a fair question. We don't have, when ranking environmental topics can be difficult, and we typically give most credence to public safety. So if there was a significant geotechnical impact, that would probably be the most important. Again, it's, and you may have a difference of opinion, that's understandable, and there probably could be some arguments that certain aspects of a certain alternative are better and worse than the other alternatives. The 50% alternative is just sheer reduction in units, less traffic, less demands for public resources and the like, would reduce impacts for views. But you're absolutely correct, that zoning, and that's how the EIR reads, that's why we have the significant unavoidable impact. And because it was intended to be protected view, the city could reconsider identifying which is the environmentally superior alternative. That doesn't, you could do that if you want to. What the alternatives do is give you a tool to kind of understand, just as you said, the trade-offs.
Right.
And to maybe formulate what you may feel is the best project.
Did I say alternative? I might have misspoke. When I said alternative B, maybe I meant alternative C. What's the one where all the units are moved to all the units except one are moved to the eastern parcel?
That is C.
That's C.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
My bad. Forgive me. It is B.
Oh, it's B. Okay.
It's and yeah, I could see argument. I mean, particularly for aesthetics, that is the superior alternative. I would agree with that.
And consistent with the underlying general plan zoning.
Land use, yeah. So that, there's certain topics that got ruled out as being a core chapter of the EIR. Land use is one of those. Doesn't mean that that's not an important issue of this previous zoning, but and as such, it doesn't make it into the alternatives as for a detailed discussion, if you will, for land use impacts. But if you had land use in there, when it comes to alternative B, that would be probably preferred. It would be superior than the other alternatives.
Right, but I guess my question to you, and it's kind of like it's a softball question. I kind of want to hear what, obviously you found, you found a better, you found well.
It's not obvious.
You'd have to go down the list of environmental topics, perhaps, and you could parse those out. But again, it's not always a scoring system. I see your point that alternative B is superior when it comes to aesthetics. I understand that.
Okay. But obviously, there's ways in which it's inferior. Alternative B, right?
Inferior. Sorry.
Inferior. I mean, it wasn't.
Right. Yeah, and it wasn't.
It wasn't
chosen.
So I want to know why.
Well, it's got more units, generates more traffic, it generates more demands for public services and utilities, it uses more energy, creates more air pollution, and more noise, for example. So when you have more units, it just kind of, it goes down the list in terms, for many topics, not necessarily geology, but things that you can quantify, more air, noise, traffic, and those are all interrelated. In terms of demands.
And that's because they weren't able to put duplexes on? Was that the reason?
I can't speak for that.
So more units the current plan is 24, right?
Correct.
And so the alternative B would be how many units?
32.
B is still 24, but it moves all of them to where it's zoned. It contemplates one unit, upwards of one unit on the western side, and all 23 on the eastern side.
All right, so I'm confused. You just said that alternative B would be more units.
If I did, I was mistaken. I thought I said 24. It's
You just said that there'd be more air pollution, more traffic, and all that stuff because there'd be more units from alternative B.
I'm sorry, I guess I'm comparing it. I thought you were comparing reduced density 50% versus the redistribution. And so that's where I'm giving you that comparison.
No, I'm on alternative B, not C.
Right. Okay, so let me, if I may, it has, well, forgive me, I want to make sure I understand your point. We chose alternative C as the environmentally superior alternative. It would appear from your statements that you may feel that B is superior. And what I was trying to do is give you the understanding of the trade-offs between fewer units in one alternative versus the same number of units as the project for alternative B, but moving those. So it is superior when it comes to protecting visual resources. It's less superior when it compared to the alternative we identified as the environmentally superior alternative when it comes to things that you, traffic, and then noise, and then air.
But then, I'm not asking you to compare B and C, I'm asking you to compare B and the chosen plan, which is putting them all on the lower parcel.
Well, that's the whole purpose of the alternatives analysis, is to choose alternatives that reduce or eliminate the significant impacts of the project. And so it was a no-brainer, and it was in the old EIR too, the redistribution of units alternative. So each of these alternatives in some ways reduces or eliminates significant impacts, and that's the goal. Then you have to choose which is superior out of all those, and that's how we came up with.
Right, and so I'm asking you to say why the project was superior to B.
Could you said why the project is superior to B?
Alternative B.
To alternative B, yeah.
I don't, the EIR doesn't say that. The project, are you?
Okay, am I asking the wrong party? Am I being clear? Have I lost everyone?
No, I'm not lost. I'm not lost.
Okay, so you're lost. I'm just kidding.
Maybe.
I'm kidding.
I apologize if I'm not following you. I just.
Tina, help me out.
So the, in the EIR, page 7-9, and it explains that alternative B, assuming alternative B is economically feasible, this alternative would meet most of all the project objectives. And then it goes on to state that, however, this alternative would not provide the 12 duplexes.
Okay, so good, great. Okay, that's what I wanted to find out. So it doesn't provide the 12 duplexes. So on the one hand, you've got, oh, you're not getting those 12 duplexes, and on the other hand, you're blowing the view corridor. So I'm trying to get a sense of what the trade-off is, the core trade-off. I'm just trying to simplify the discussion, that's all. Is that it?
It's because units aren't built as duplexes. I mean, because alternative B does contemplate 23 units, however, on the eastern parcel. It's just that they're not built in a duplex form. Is that the idea?
Right.
Okay.
Why does that matter?
Right. Why does that matter?
The EIR is required to address whether the project meets the basic objectives of the project. And those are listed in the project description and repeated in the alternatives. And so we go down that list of objectives. And it's not an environmental issue. You're just required to address if it meets the objectives.
So the project description turns on, so again, the project proposes duplexes. Is that the idea? Is that why that statement is relevant? Because the project actually proposes duplexes as opposed to something different?
Correct. That's
Okay.
right. So if the alternative doesn't meet what the objectives say, we just acknowledge that. We don't necessarily reject it as infeasible.
Right.
But-
So that's a big issue because in the environmental review field, which I'm part, when you narrow the description of the project to a place where you've got it down to the duplex level, as opposed to, let's say, you want 24 units of housing. That's what you want. That's your project purpose, not I need 24 units of housing in duplex form. That narrows the project purpose to a point where you really can't have an alternatives analysis. And I think that's why we're running into this issue here, because it is so hemmed in that now the alternatives hinge and distinguish from each other based on duplex, which is too narrow a project purpose, at least from my perspective.
I can see where we're coming from. It sounds like we're starting to move into a direction that is really kind of more description and discussion that maybe ought to occur after we've had a chance to hear from the public.
We need to get the public up here.
I think so. So I see some lights on. Unless it's absolutely essential that we ask this question right now, these questions, now I'm going to defer these lights and move on to opening the public hearing. So hold your fire. We're going to go ahead then and open the public hearing, and we start, of course, with the applicant, and the applicant will have 10 minutes to address the commission.
My name is Jonathan Clark. I represent Strauss Design Group Architects from Brentwood, California. There's been a lot of discussion so far, so I don't want to rehash a ton of stuff. And staff did a great job going over the project, and it sounds like we got a lot of input from the EIR consultant. So I just want to touch on a couple things and maybe answer a couple questions that came up and clarify. This is one of the renderings that was part of the EIR process. This is one of the view or aesthetic images that was produced to make that analysis. And just before I go too deep, staff gave a great history lesson of the project, and our goal, as the architecture firm, along with the client and the ownership group, is to make a buildable, feasible project. So when this project came to our firm, it came with the previous approvals, and it was not feasible to be built. And we went through a couple iterations with different planning staff at the time to essentially take those approvals and use what those approvals were and work with staff to find a buildable and feasible project. We went through a couple iterations with lower density projects, and at the time, city staff gave direction to increase density, which is still less than what the approval was. And so you can see from the site plan that we have now, our site, like was noted in the staff report, our site essentially exists in the same location that the previously approved project existed in. The main difference, obviously, is that we have less units, and they're duplex units. We worked to maintain the landscaping, trails, all those little open space amenities, but worked really hard to stay within the previously approved and existing entitlements, hoping at the time that we would be able to work with staff in the city to get that project approved without having to trigger the 4-year process that we've been in now since. And so, obviously the parcel that we have is very large. Quickly, the reason this project is where it is because that's where it was before, because that's where you could build buildings. This is a ridge line way up here. It makes it very difficult to build the units up there. It's a smaller width. Access becomes harder. But that's why the project was located where it was originally. That's why the development rights were transferred down there, and we're just kind of existing in that little bubble that was kind of provided to us, and we're working within that. Granted, we're in a very specific, a very unique situation now because those development rights and entitlements have expired. So you guys are seeing this kind of in a fresh view because there's nothing that really binds you to the previous entitlements. But, we put our project together with those previous entitlements in mind. And so, that's where our project is today. One of the big things that we talk about or came up was aesthetics. This is a rendering of what the project would look like along Fassler Avenue, from the east side here on the high side to the west side on the low side. We worked to step the buildings down the hillside. We worked to keep the form simple and yet illustrative of the hillside, and trying to get the colors and materials to blend in with the surrounding areas. Because we had a previously approved project, we were taking our project and overlaying it and looking at it in context with the previously approved project. This example here in the greenish color was the previously approved project. On the high side, it was much taller. As we go through, we get a little taller, and then we even out pretty much down on the low side. And then we'll talk a little bit about why that's kind of an issue now, though we didn't talk about it. There weren't many questions about it. But generally, architecturally, our project has, a mix of stone, stucco, siding, and metal awnings. Again, the buildings follow the hillside. And then just our last little slide was the same one that we brought before. I do have other slides that talk a little more about architecture if we really need to get there, but I don't think that's really a lot of the concern that we need to address tonight. I want to address a couple other little things that came up. There was a question about public access. Essentially, the properties are private property. To my knowledge, there's not any public easements being proposed. I think that's all I really could say about that. Traffic easement, traffic impacts, trucks. That's the bonus. So let me just touch on a couple little things. We agree. Staff did a great job. It's one of the best staff reports that I've seen, very thorough and very responsive to the public input, as well through the EIR process. We, as a development team, were seeking the in lieu payments for the BMRs, and in doing that, we didn't take advantage of any density bonuses that are required if we actually provided them. Obviously, staff is a condition that we provided BMRs at this time, and we are on board with that condition. But we're not going to take advantage of all the things that come with it. I mean, our project is pretty much set in stone. This is the project that can be built on this site, and so we're not going to try and go back and take advantage of those things that come with actually providing BMRs, even though it would be in our best interest. So I think I addressed a lot of the things that came up. I'm sure there's going to be more comments and more questions. One last little thing about the traffic that I just came up. The development team, and again, I represent the development team. Obviously, a civil engineer is involved in this project and is more closely working with city engineering to address those issues along Fassler. But there were iteration after iteration about the appropriate traffic mitigation about going into and out of our proposed project along Fassler. Just for your information, my understanding is the sheet that Commissioner Clifford referenced that shows the lane widths, my understanding is that design was worked out with city and engineering and how they want access provided to the project. I know we've gone through a couple iterations, and I'm sure if the current design doesn't keep everybody happy, I'm sure we're gonna go through iterations with city staff again to try and figure out something to get everybody happy. And then one last little thing. I think as a professional, it would be very unwise to condition a single project to maintain a public road during construction, unless you could specifically create a nexus between damages that our project potentially could make to those actual damages. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of vehicles that use public roads every day, and to penalize one project to improve a road that is used by the public at large, it just really isn't fair for the project here. With that, I am here to answer questions, and I love to answer questions. And so I'll finish with that and say thank you.
Thank you, sir. I have every reason to expect you'll have some questions to answer. Looks like Commissioner Clifford had a question or two.
I'm fast on the button tonight.
Yeah, you are.
Could you bring up the slide that shows the comparison in heights between the two from Fassler?
Yes, absolutely. There it is.
Okay. Now, my starting question is are the old projects buildings set on what grade was for them?
So that's the interesting part about when we talk about heights and how heights are calculated. The previous project was built on a podium deck, a subterranean garage that was essentially being cut out of the mountain and built. And when that was done, the building heights were measured from the top of that podium deck, which means that their buildings could be 35 feet on top of that concrete structure. That concrete structure, for part of it, is inside the hill, you would never see it, and part of it was outside the hill, you would see it. So, in my professional opinion, it could be slightly misleading on one half of that structure because you get away with not having to count that parking structure. And so the previously approved project essentially said, hey, we meet the 35-foot height requirement. Our project, to make it more feasible, we opted not to build that subterranean garage because it's just super costly. And so in doing that, we have to build on top of the grade and make the grading work so that we could build essentially on top of the dirt. The city of Pacifica, of course, because this is a hill, their height requirement says the height of the building is measured from the lowest point of the building at the foundation to the highest point of the building at its roof. Mm-hmm. And so because of that, our heights are high. They're higher than the 35 feet. And that's purely because of how it's measured. Building code typically measures from medium of grade plane to medium of roof structure, which is if you took just straight building code, that's how it's measured. Obviously, the Pacifica zoning, we measure it by that. But most of our height busts really occur just because of the way the architecture is designed to create that interest in angled roofs. And mostly because of the way the zoning code requires us to measure height. Because it's a hillside, height becomes a little deceiving, right? Because a hill, if you're looking up the hill, you're going to go, oh my gosh, that thing's so tall. And if you're going to look down the hill, you're going to go, oh, that doesn't look so bad, right? And so you just have to keep that in mind, we're not talking about you standing next to the building that's 45 feet tall. You're seeing it from different vantage points and in different areas that will either make it look taller or make it look smaller or make it look just right.
Okay. I heard all of your answer, but I never did hear the answer to my question. My question was, in terms of current grade, the grade that was proposed for the original project, are those green representations sitting at that grade or the grade that you're going to create with the fill? You're doing a comparison. I want to make sure that the comparisons
that comparison is where that project would have sit based on its grading. And then our project is overlaid or underlaid on that based on our grading.
Okay, I'm having a problem with that because in some places you're going to be filling up to 10 feet. So if it's going from 2.5 feet to 10 feet, none of those show the green going below the line that you're representing up there. So in terms of visualization, I don't know that you're not telling me.
I think we're just making some generalizations here. I mean, like I said, that project was designed to be on a podium.
one part of that, and the podium wasn't that tall because it was actually underground parking.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I understand. But every
I
structure.
remember because I was here during
Yeah,
that
no, I
project.
know, but every structure was built on that podium, right? And so the green represents that project in location to the existing site, if that project was built that way. Our project's,
The grade you're showing there right now,
yeah.
is that the grades you intend to install with the fill?
Those are the finished grades that's shown in the design
Okay.
review board
So
booklet, yes.
I am still having a problem that's not, doesn't seem to me to be a real comparative representation, because you're going to fill in a great deal.
The previous project was going to fill in about the same amount that we're filling in.
You're going up to almost 20,000 cubic yards.
The previous project cut 18,000 cubic yards, and they filled 19,000 cubic yards. They were moving the same amount of dirt that we're moving. The difference between our project and their project is we're cutting 9,000, and then we have to find 10,000 from some other source. So we're still moving dirt onto the site in pretty much the same amount.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Well, I think actually, again, just in the interest of, I'm going to ask Commissioner Staging to hold your question so that we can move along to get public comment in light of the hour. So at this point, then I'm going to go ahead and turn to the speaker cards that I have here. I've got Joan Garuso. We're going to start with Joan Garuso, followed by Hal Boner.
Good evening, and thank you for listening to the public.
You might pull the mic down just a little bit.
My
Okay, that's
husband and I have lived on Fassler Avenue since the very beginning. We're original owners and still there. And I had written up some of my concerns. Of course, the very first one is the traffic. Any of you could come and stay at our house and witness and drive down that road and see for yourself. So it's just a nightmare. And does the present design actually make room for fire trucks to maneuver in and out of that driveway that's circular in design? Why is the height of the condominiums increased? Why? This architect just explained that, because I know the first one was not that high. And are the utility poles underground? Because lately, lots of trucks, heavy trucks, tall trucks have been knocking down power lines on the upper part of Fassler. There's a city weight limit on trucks because the roads and piping have been a problem with heavy trucks now. The old terracotta plumbing that belongs to the city, there have been we had to replace everything all the way to the street, and then part of your city plumbing structure that was old terracotta. And I really thank you for investigating this thoroughly, especially the traffic, since we still haven't even gotten Caltrans to fix the land that's sliding there by the orchid farm. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garuso. I'll just note that we have your written question and comments here as well, and those are part of the record. Hal Boner, followed by Joanne Arnos.
Good evening, Commissioners. Hal Bonner. A couple of things. One is when I read the staff report, I see that the Commission is certifying the EIR and, making the statement overriding considerations and all that. I was kind of surprised to see that. I thought this was the Planning Commission made recommendations to the the council, and it was the council that would certify or not certify the EIR. So I'm a little confused about that point. I thought, well, anyway, I don't see anything in the city ordinance that authorizes the commission to certify EIRs. That may seem like a technical point, but it actually may have some more significance here. So what I want to focus on is the inclusionary zoning ordinance. The developer, of course, has requested the opportunity to pay in lieu fees instead of actually building the below market rate units. And I'm glad to see that staff has recommended against that. I certainly would ask that you not allow the in lieu fees, and I hope that's the way you go. However, the timing here is, I guess I could say, a little confusing or problematical. You would be making a statement of overriding considerations, and I'll read part of that. It says, the project would result in a development that would provide highly desired housing stock in Pacifica, provide inclusionary housing, assist Pacifica toward making its regional housing need allocations, et cetera. I don't see how you can do that now. The project does not provide inclusionary housing now, and as your staff report said, that just providing in lieu fees does not guarantee inclusionary housing. So I don't know how you can make a finding that inclusionary housing would be part of the project when, A, you have not even required inclusionary housing, and B, certainly the city council has not required inclusionary housing. The city council could allow the in lieu fees if the developer persists in requesting the in lieu fees. So I don't know if I've made myself clear with that point, but it seems like you have a little bit of a dilemma here, and I'm asking if you could take a look at that. And I just want to emphasize, I am not supportive of allowing in lieu fees. I'm opposed to allowing in lieu fees, and I hope you do not allow them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonner. Joanne Arnos, followed by Noel Blinko.
Joanne Arnos, live back on Odstead, travel on Fassler every day. I've already written to you, I've submitted my objections to this project. I think in front of you, you have an opportunity to impact the city of Pacifica in ways that we haven't even heard about tonight, in terms of our open spaces, the traffic, wildlife, and in terms of the environmental, supplementary environmental report, it hasn't addressed the general plan statements about keeping open vistas open, and it also hasn't addressed the Pacifica Hillside Preservation Ordinances, which, talk about open space, vistas that will stay open for ocean views, hillside views, and things like that. Anyways, I don't want to take up all your time in quoting the facts here on those two, but I hope that you'll look into the ordinances that were written, and they were written years ago to supposedly protect our hillsides and our open spaces. And I happen to be familiar with Mr. Clifford on the Open Space Task Force, which decided to struggle with this low-density ordinance to transfer to open space ordinance, hillside preservation, and it was a bug in our ear then, and it sounds like from what I've heard tonight, it's still a bug in your ear too, in terms of the whole ordinance about that, or the direction that one needs to focus on in terms of building low density to into a more open space project. Anyways, I've been here for hours. I'm exhausted. I haven't done my presentation as succinctly as I wished I could have, but I have written to you, and as I said, one comment about the traffic. I'm on Fassler every day, and I want to remind you that I'm back on Odsted, where the school system is going to develop low-income housing for the school employees, which means not all school employees are going to be traveling back on Lindemar. They're going to be going out to other schools in the city, which is more of an impact in traffic, not just this project that's in front of you. But you have an important task right now. I think it's going to be monumental, and these buildings are not going to go away. There will be a heritage here in this city that we'll see for a long, long time. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Arness. Noel Blinko, followed by Patrick Coburnis.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. I am Noel Blanco, and I served for many years on the Open Space Committee, and proudly, and our Open Space Committee has had many accomplishments. One of the major elements on this project is the view corridor. I want to commend Commissioner Gordon at bringing that subject up, because we're talking about transferring from low density on the eastern side to open space residential. Now, through the years, what's been primary in this town is preserving our hillsides and our open spaces on the hillside. Now, this project that's being proposed, if you go down to the quarry and out on the trail there, that whole area, and look back east up the hill, you'll be able to see this project. This project is going to be a terrible view corridor throughout a major part of Pacifica into the quarry area. But the key thing, this land has low density, so the developer could build something up the hill. Why he wants to come down the hill, you can ask him that question. Commissioner Gordon was driving at that, trying to figure out, well, what's all this? Why do you want to build in the view corridor when you don't have to? Now, this significant impact is on HPD, Hillside Preservations, and I want to remind you, in the Hillside Preservation District, there is a very definite statement. It is the intent of this section in the Hillside Preservation District to discourage development of ridge lines. Now, it also goes on, if you have to build on the ridge line, any such development should be of low profile and have minimum visual view. So that would mean, 11.2 acres, the eastern half. If you stand out in the quarry on that trail and look up the hill, you're going to be able to see this project, but further up the hill, as we were talking about, you would not see the project. So the curve, the way the hills are, the one part of the hill, the eastern side, if the developer wants to develop there, it'll be out of sight. Where it's at now, it's going to be in sight, big site, and you guys are going to be in a lot of trouble if you want to approve a project like this, because we worked for years keeping our hillside open. And what this project means is filling up the hillsides with 44-foot houses. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Blinko. Patrick Coburnis, followed by Rudolph Garusa.
Thank you. I had 3 comments on this project. I live in the Seacrest Townhomes, 903 Fassler Avenue. And one of the questions I had about this project was, will we be able to see it? because it's hard to tell from the renderings looking down slope from where we're at if we'll be able to see it. It would be nice if there was some story poles or something, but I know that I don't think the city requires that, but it'd be nice to have some way to evaluate if that's going to be blocking some of our ocean view from Seacrest. On the other hand, I wanted to say that that looking at this project, and it makes sense to me where they want to build because it's a lot flatter down there on the lower east side, and the upper side of it, on the lower west side, the upper side is much more constrained. It's more narrow and steeper, that there's going to be more cut and fill on that side. That's my perspective. And biologically, it looks to me that it's nicer on the east side, that if they were to protect that area, there's more native grasses. Another point I wanted to make is that part of that parcel, that lower part, the western side, was an old quarry, so there's less habitat values, more disturbed. There's also pampas grass, invasive species on that parcel, that it would be nice if part of this project they would control that. And there's also some dumping that's been done out there. It would be nice if they got rid of that, cleaned up the garbage on the site. My last point was that because I'm living at Seacrest, we're kind of isolated up there. No sidewalk, no access to trails. And I thought this project would be a great opportunity, actually, for us to be able to share a trail or connect through that eastern parcel, since they're already building trails. And I made a little map about 6 months ago. I sent it to Bonnie, and I have some copies of it here I could hand out to the commissioners, just to show how short of an extension it would be to Seacrest to allow us to connect over to their trail. Okay, and then lastly, if the talk about the sidewalk to nowhere earlier, that it's because we don't have a sidewalk in front of Seacrest, and the sidewalk upslope comes down along Fassler and stops at Seacrest. But if it continued through Seacrest, it would connect to this development and make it more contiguous for people to be able to walk more. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coburnis. Maybe we'll just get those copies to staff, and we'll take it from there. Mr. Garusa, followed by Carolyn Jaramillo.
Good afternoon. My name is Rudolph M. Gerusa, Gerusa. We moved to Fassler Avenue June 20th, 1962. I have seen lots of progress on the town. Lots of them are very good when they first started putting them up. But now, living on Fassler, I have to back my car into the garage or go up the hill and turn around so I can come to the traffic. The traffic is horrible. They got 35 houses, and now it's going to be about 65 cars. They get more to go up the hill and down the hill. So that's bad. I like Mr. Stamford said, what he said about the traffic. Traffic is bad, but that's the way it is. The gentleman presented a nice program. They're programmed to say that. So it's up to you to decide whether it's a good project, a bad project, or whether start all over again and build something not as bad as it looks like that, like a bunch of little houses on top. It doesn't look like a home. So bear with me. I'll be 90 in March next year. We love Pacifica. Right now, we have a third generation granddaughter. Our children grew up here, went to school here, and got educated, and they're doing very fine. Pacifica is a wonderful place. We moved out one time in '09 to the desert with my son, and we couldn't take it because we couldn't see the ocean. So after about 9 months trying to sell the house and wouldn't sell it, so now the prices dropped down, we couldn't wait, said, forget it, we're coming home. There's nothing better than to look at the ocean. But now Fessler is so plugged up, you cannot look at the ocean and drive out or drive in. Thank you for my, whatever you call it. And Mr. Stemper is correct. Traffic. You shouldn't build nothing no more until you fix Highway 1. It's plugged up from 1 all the way to the top in the morning. All the guys from the back of the rally come around Roberts Road, going, trying to get out. But it's all plugged up all the way to, over the hill. So thank you for whatever I said.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Garusa. The last card I have is for Carolyn Jaramillo.
Good evening. I'm Carolyn Jaramillo, homeowner and member of Fair Rents for Pacifica. I'm opposed the developer's request to pay an in lieu fee instead of building affordable housing units as currently required by the city's inclusionary housing ordinance. Pacifica badly needs affordable housing units, so I'm pleased that the staff has requested that request be denied. Thank you for attention.
Thank you, Ms. Jaramillo. And that's all the speaker slips I have. So seeing no one else who wants to address the commission on this matter, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing and bring the matter back to the commission. And
Mr. Chair, would you like to give the applicant a rebuttal period?
I guess I would. Thank you. I don't know if the applicant wanted to say anything in response to the comments raised.
No.
Thank you. Okay, so that'll bring the matter back then. And I guess we could, I don't know how folks are feeling, whether you feel like you need a break, whether you want to just launch right in. Okay, well, it looks like at the far end there, we could use a break, and I don't know how long it's going to take for us to continue to move forward. So why don't we go ahead and take 5 minutes?
Thank you.
Yep, move around.
Somebody else wearing your...
Let's get to the right page again.
All right, can we go ahead and start? Great. It's 9:55. We're going to go ahead and sort of recommence our proceedings here. And so we've, just prior to the break, we had finished up with public comment and closed the public hearing and brought the matter back to the commission. And I guess at this juncture, I mean, there are various things we could do. We just move forward. I don't know if folks want to see how much progress we can make in the next, well, however much time we want to allot ourselves, or whether there are other thoughts on the best way to proceed. Maybe I'll just start calling on the lights that I have in front of me. Commissioner Campbell.
So I didn't get the answer on it, but it was the open space preservation. So back when we approved this in 2007 and 2008, as part of the findings for the approval of the transfer of the residential development rights from the east to the west, we required that the applicant permanently, via conservation easement, secure that open space on the eastern parcel. And we did that for a few different reasons. One is we wanted to ensure that that eastern parcel wasn't developed, which I think kind of went to one of the speakers said, because it is developable. And the second was to provide a habitat corridor and preserve biological resources. And another was to benefit the residents and visitors to Pacifica that drive along Fassler, to retain that open space, and to reduce environmental impacts. And it was a big deal. When we had 30 speakers that night, we actually had 30 speakers, I think, 2, maybe 3 times in a row. And this was a big concession that was made. So that's a big deal. I don't know why it dropped out or was never secured. Maybe city has an answer.
Yeah, so when you initially asked the question, I kind of understood the conservation easement kind of by itself, but actually part of the density transfer ordinance does require that there be some sort of covenant of open space or conservation easement recorded on the sending parcel, so it cannot be developed in the future. So although this time around it may not be explicit in the conditions of approval, we can do so if that is what the commission would like. As implementing this ordinance, if this project is ultimately approved, there will be recordation of an easement on that property.
And then kind of the other little part of that was that the conservation easement that we talked about, and thank you for that, thanks for that clarification, wasn't just the eastern parcel, but it wrapped around some of the western too. So it actually was to the north, south, and to the east, just to really make sure that we weren't going to have any sort of a spread later. I don't know if that map still exists anywhere, but it probably
does, yes.
pretty suitable for this purposes. Now, it's one comment.
I actually had a question. I see some more lights, but I didn't want to lose track of this. It was a comment that I think Mr. Bonner had raised regarding whether or not we're as a planning commission, the proper body for certification of the EIR. And I know that the CEQA guidelines, I think at 15090, talk to the decision-making body being the body that's supposed to certify the EIR. And it looked like some of the matters we're the decision-making body on, maybe some aren't. I was sort of curious, we're not. I was sort of curious as to what the city attorney thought of that comment.
So generally, based on my review of the ordinances, it seems like the Planning Commission is going to be making the final approvals for the project, with the exception of some of those legislative actions that are being made by the city. If the Planning Commission's not granting final approval, the resolution should recommend certification to be done by the City Council. So, in abundance of caution, we can make that change to the resolution, but my understanding of the current ordinances and the actions being done now are that there is sufficient authority with the Planning Commission to make the certification of the EIR.
Okay.
And I can clarify that actually the items except for the legislative actions you are the final
So all the
decision-making
discretionary
body.
pieces that, aside from the legislative stuff?
Yes.
We are, okay.
Yes, so the council will then need to make their own findings for certification when they take their action, their final action on the legislative matters.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
So, and then just to take that a little bit further, in case there's follow-up questions, the actions that are final with the Planning Commission are going to be contingent on the legislative matters being approved by the City Council.
Okay, thanks so much. I'll go back then to Commissioner Stedjink, whose light's been on and he's been very patient.
It's very unlike me. It's late. I'm going to put my cards on the table on what would make this project viable for myself. The in lieu fees are a deal breaker. Our city simply can't allow any further in lieu fees without possibly negating the entire actions of the planning department. It's too high. We need a traffic report, and we need to guarantee the preservation of open spaces. As we look through, I'd like to remind that the commissioners aren't bound by WRA's singular choice of one of four. We can redistribute units, doesn't have to be the old plan, and we can reduce density. Essentially, there is no old plan because it's expired. So we can do anything. We can make it bigger than the original old plan. We can make it smaller, and just bear that in mind. But that's what it would take to make this project viable for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Clifford.
Well, I support Commissioner Stedjan in what he said, and I also would like to see a condition of approval on this project that limits the hours that the fill trucks can actually come in, because if they start coming in as the hours are specified in our documents, they could be there from 7 in the morning until 7 at night. 7 in the morning, they're going to be right in the middle of the commute. Well, I think we need to have something that says that they come later than that, that they're, once we determine what the commute, the tail end of the commute is then we can allow those trucks to come in with fill. It just doesn't make sense otherwise. We'll just, they'll be backed up and not be able to do their job, and traffic will be screwed up also. So that's one condition I would like to see in. I also, I know I've asked some really hard questions tonight, but that's not because I don't want to see something built. It's because I want what's built to be right for the community. I also I have some environmental issues that I would like to see included in the project. One, I'd like to see a lot more permeable surface up there. I'd like to see the lighting to be somehow solar powered. I'd also like to see solar panels on the roof. I'd like to know about the treating of the runoff water. They've got a two-stage system there, but I'm not hearing that any of that runoff water is going to be treated in any manner. I'd like to know if there is a treatment process that can be done so that we're not getting stuff running right down to the ocean that's not good for it. The wildlife corridors are also important to me, and I'm not clear. I know we're not into the building end of it yet, but I'd also like to see plug-ins for electric cars for all of the vehicles that are going to be up there. The state has already said that they're pushing towards not having anything but electric cars being sold in the state in not the too distant future. So we should maybe be making allowances for that in what we're allowing to be built. Let's see if I missed anything. I've already talked about my concerns about the reduction in the lane, and I would really love to see a study that deals with that. And also going back to the representative for the project and him feeling that it's unjust or unfair that we talk about having them repair any damage that they do to the road from Fassler to their project. I think that is entirely fair to expect them to do that. Now, I'm not saying that there will be damage or that they'll have to pay anything, but it should be part of their expectation in putting this project together. If they really degrade the road, they're responsible for that. Their trucks are a lot heavier than the private vehicles that go up and down that hill.
It's definitely true.
So I think that pretty much covers it. I am also a little bit concerned about whether or not they actually need as much fill as they're talking about trucking. And we're talking 3 months worth of, I'm gonna give round trips, 18 to 34 round trips a day for 3 months. That's a lot of fill. And I'd like to know if the project couldn't be built with less fill and maybe a little more cut up there and move it around on the site. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Clifford. That'll take me to Commissioner Campbell then.
I wanted to agree with the commissioners who've said we need the housing instead of the in lieu fee. That was also something in 2007 and 8 that was hotly debated and agreed upon by everybody, that we would have the 4 units of housing and not have an in lieu fee, and that was a big, big deal. And then just to follow up a little bit on what Commissioner Clifford was saying, is that there was a lot of trade-offs that went into this project back then because it was super controversial. We were seen as moving development into the Hillside Preservation Ordinance territory. And so there was a lot of horse trading that went on to get that done. One was the easement, the conservation easement, a little bigger, I think, than just the eastern parcel, but I'm not 100% sure on that, so I'd like to see that. But there were also things that we had the developer agree to. For example, this would have been one of the first residential developments to actually have solar panels back in 2007 as on everything, which is pretty cool. The subterranean garage was a big deal. We had electric plug-ins for the cars. We had a whole host of things. All the gutters had to go to water tanks for landscape watering. We had trails. We had pretty extensive mitigation and monitoring plan for wildlife during construction. We had them sealing the streets outside the, slurry sealing the streets outside their project area. I could go on and on. I mean, but it wasn't as extensive as the Harmony one, but there was some really nice things that we got traded for. I voted for the density transfer at the time because of a lot of these trade-offs, and because the space was flatter and more degraded, and it just seemed like a better place to build, so long as we got wildlife, that wildlife corridor on the eastern parcel taken care of, and a lot of these other things. So I just want to put that out there as, I guess, to say the things that I would like to see if we have the applicant come back would be an improved traffic analysis. I would like a better understanding, so that'd be one. Two, I'd like a better understanding in the alternatives analysis about why duplexes mean something as far as ruling out alternatives. Three, I just want that conservation easement, and
It's come to my attention of condition approval 14C and D, which requires a deed restriction on the sending parcel, giving up development rights.
Absolutely. And I'm just saying, I want to make, we talked during that period of time about the conservation easement moving not only from the east, but north and south, wrapping around the project. So I'm not sure what happened there. The trail goes cold for me on the record that I've got. But yeah, thank you for that. That's it for me at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Campbell. Commissioner Gordon?
Thank you, Chair. All right. Just I'm doing some deep thinking here, guys. And so I'm really disturbed by the underlying premise of the density transfer. We all should really be clear about what we're being asked to do here. Our predecessors, City Council, Open Space Committee, Planning Commission, all got together, and the community got together and approved a general plan that took a look at the upper and lower parcel here and said, hey, this lower parcel is incredibly valuable to this community because of the view corridor, open space. If there's going to be development in that area, let's put it on the upper parcel, not on the lower parcel. And what are we being asked to do here? Wow, we're being asked to completely upend that, to completely go against what our predecessors said. Hey, in our wisdom, we think it should be like this, and we're being asked to say, no, it shouldn't. It should be the opposite. Let's build on the view. Let's build right in the view corridor. I understand that the space is flatter. The space is, the lower parcel is flatter. The lower parcel is probably biologically in a more degraded condition. So those are factors that weigh on building the lower parcel. That's fine. There's always trade-offs. But what you got to ask yourself is whether the fact that it's flatter, the fact that it's more degraded, does that outweigh the fact that forever you are taking away that view corridor forever? My God, there's no way I don't think that there's any way that I could come to do that, to agree to vote on that. Because in that sense, what they came up with, there is a policy reason why they came up with that, and what we would be doing is absolutely upending that policy reason directly. There's no getting around it. So anyway, I can't even wrap my brain around agreeing to that kind of swap, unless somebody can really explain to me, okay, hey, besides the fact that it's flatter grade, okay, the fact that there's more degrading, convince me that there's like a trade-off that's worth giving up that view corridor for our children, for our grandchildren, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, So that's where you know, I know you, maybe I'm not at the point of like talking about the units and the height. You know, I've got issues with the height, blah, 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 blah. Even the market rate issue, I'm definitely in favor of not going along with the in lieu fees. But honestly, guys, I'm not even there. I'm at this, the fundamental premise of the density transfer. I just can't even wrap my brain around.
Thank you. Commissioner Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to be brief here. I was looking through the plans. I did some research just for everybody's idea of what San Francisco would charge for in lieu fee. So right around $360,000 for 2-bedroom, 3 bedrooms about $417,000. I tried to do some quick research of what that would look like as far as a tax benefit to the city. Had you charged a higher price for the unit, obviously you get more tax revenue. And it just doesn't really pan out for me for the benefit of the community. I really think that the in lieu of fee is not a really viable alternative, especially in as many study sessions as we've been in to provide affordable housing. So I think that it's very prudent to go ahead and not demand the in lieu fee, but request the actual housing. It's a big issue for me. The other issue is I do like there's this talk about the height issues. There was a building A alternate in some of the plans, if you guys noticed, which is a little of a shorter of a building. I do like the alternate A better than I like the taller building, so I thought that was a good idea. To reiterate Tom Clifford's issue on the hours, I certainly believe that no delivery should happen before 8:30 a.m. That would put people on the road probably right around 9, which would get people off of that corridor. I don't need any more construction traffic down that area. I do have a huge problem with the turnout, both in and out of that building. I don't think there should be a left turn on Fassler to go up the hill. I think you're asking for a very serious accident there. I don't like the sidewalks to nowhere. Again, as a commissioner, I kind of look for the future. What's going to happen in the development around the area? What's going to happen when Harmony Out 1 goes? If you had friends at Harmony Out 1 and they wanted to come see you, or even up Seacrest, how would you get in the complex? Because you go from a sidewalk to nowhere. So I think there should be sidewalks within the complex itself. The other issue I have is that if you look at the drive within that complex, there's no sidewalks to walk your dog. If you wanted to walk your dog to your neighbor's house, there's really nowhere to walk except in the street. I don't see that that's a viable alternative. In the center portion, there's sidewalks amongst the building, but there's no way to get from one unit to another unit around that area. I would be concerned about the width of that lane. It seems like you have parking spaces, and then you have, I think, about 20 feet for 2 lanes of traffic going both ways. So I would be very concerned about getting fire in and out of that area. I'm also concerned about people who pull into that driveway and they went to the wrong place. How do they turn around? How do they get back out of your complex without having to go all the way around your complex? There are going to be probably families living in there, so there are going to be children on the street. It'd certainly be nice to have a place for them just to turn around and get the heck out of the complex. One of the big things that I do want, and I'm going to reserve this to the community who lives within the complex, because that's how I think I can phrase it properly. The community facilities element, part of this element was to provide access to open space. And I think that if you had an access to Fassler Avenue from the top side of the area for your residents to exit out to the sidewalk and back, would provide a greater, let's say, visual appearance to what that open space actually is. We do have condo developments down by the beach that provide their trails. It's kind of an ongoing trail system, and they provided access so people could actually enjoy the area with obviously a right of first refusal to actually get on the property. But I think it's important that everybody has access to that area. You talk about a hummingbird area, you talk about a bird sanctuary. Well, if no one can get to it, then what's the point? So I think that would be a very kind of an advantageous issue for me. I certainly think the conservation element is a big element. I think that if we had that restriction, that would be great. And I'm going to limit to that.
Excellent. Well, I don't really have anything to add. I think everybody's, sort of very comprehensively kind of cataloged various concerns. So I'm not, certainly where Commissioner Gordon is at this point. I think I'm a little further down the road than that. And so probably more in a camp of folks who've got some concerns about things that should be addressed. But I'm wondering at this point whether or not staff has a sense of the of the sense that the commission at this point as to some additional things we'd like analyzed. I know traffic was a big issue. Certainly more information about, how it is that we ended up with this density transfer and some of the rationale for that. And, well, anyway, you all heard all the same things. I don't know that I need to go and catalog all of it. But it seems to me that we're probably not in a place at this juncture where anybody's going to feel comfortable taking a vote. Ready to fall out of our chairs, in fact. So I think I'm wondering if in a continuance of the item might be in order so that we can gather some more information.
I would say so, and I would suggest a continuance to the first meeting in December, because there is a lot of information that you've asked for, just to make sure we have enough time. And hopefully that is enough time. We will let you know if we need more. And so that date is December 4th.
December 4th. Do you need a motion and a vote on that? So it looks like Commissioner Clifford remains fast on the button today. So Commissioner Clifford.
So I move that we continue this item to December 4th, is what I heard?
Yes.
And that's that.
Excellent. Commissioner Cooper.
I'll second the motion.
Motion is second. Okay, well, everybody's voted. That's unanimously been approved, so we'll see this matter at the first meeting in December. Thank you.
And through the chair, before we move on to communications, can we go back and get a liaison for
Thank you.
1127?
Neglected to do that after item 2. So I want to go back then to the item of designation of a liaison to the City Council meeting of November 27th, 2017. And this relates to the Alternative Financial Services Ordinance. I was wondering if perhaps somebody who voted in favor of this item might be prepared to serve as a liaison. Commissioner Stedging?
Actually, I was going to suggest Rich Campbell simply because of his history.
On the Alternative Financial Services Ordinance?
Sorry, yes, I will volunteer for that.
Were you volunteering for that?
I am. I'm volunteering for that.
Well done. Thank you, sir. We will accept your gracious offer to serve as a liaison.
Sorry, Rich.
You can sit back down. Well done. Excellent. Thank you. So that item of business has been dealt with. That takes us then to commission communications. Commissioner Stedging.
Yeah, I'd like to talk real briefly about AB 678 and AB 1515 passed last month. Essentially, they say, I'm just going to read it, AB 15 SB 167 require local government provide developers with a list of any inconsistencies between a proposed project and all local plans, zoning, and standards within 30 to 60 days after the housing application is complete, or the project will be deemed consistent with all local policies. Essentially, it's a keep everybody apprised of any problems, or it's got a poison pill in there. I would suggest that that's going to require more staff and money that you currently have. And while I'm a huge fan of lean government, and I think we should sell all our lawnmowers and hire vendors to mow the lawn, these 12 new laws are going to create such a burden on planning that you really have to go back and get more staff or money to address that. And I'd be happy to support any efforts at a city council level to do that. I would also suggest that without the poison pill, we extend AB 678 and SB 167, or the spirit of the law, to not only developers, but to also residents doing residential remodels, construction, et cetera. I'm appreciative of everything planning does, but by far that's the most frequent complaint I have is people have no idea what's outstanding, what's coming, when in fact, maybe it's a checklist, but sometimes people feel blindsided on there. As a second item, and I'll try to wrap this up within a minute, I'm not sure what we'd have to do staff and money-wise to come out with a agenda on a Wednesday. It would certainly help planning just in general. We've had a couple meetings where we had one residence on the docket, and then we get 5 inches of paper on Friday afternoon there. Also, in terms of transparency, I don't know if we can put this on Nextdoor. It would be simple to list the agenda on Nextdoor at the same time. Allegedly, they have 9,000 users. And also, if there'd be any way to move this from a simple classified ad in the Tribune to a display ad, maybe in the front section where maybe it's just the agenda heading, titles, and the parcel number, but some sort of I first learned of some of these projects on November 25th, when people who get the paper on a Tuesday had said, hey, are you aware this is coming? And it's difficult to look anything but unprepared when you simply have no knowledge of what's coming. Thank you very much, and thank you for all your work tonight. I think staff reports were all well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Campbell.
I just wanted to ask about the cannabis ordinance, and do we have applicants yet, or what's the latest?
We do not, and the reason for that is because the way the ordinance is written is it's not effective unless the tax passes. And the council, if the tax doesn't pass, the council can do something different with that in the future. And then assuming the tax passes, the ordinance would be effective sometime in January when the election is certified. And then, if you recall, there's timing triggers for when applications are due, when the police chief does his thing, and then so there's we're still a couple months out if everything passes before we'll have like a final due date for applications.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, that's what I have for, looks like for Commission Communications, so that takes us into staff communications.
So just real quickly, we had some sad news today regarding a colleague's death, but with sad news also comes joyful news. So I wanted to report to you guys that on Halloween, our assistant planner, Rob Smith, and his wife welcomed their first son. And so his name is Rory Chapman Smith, 8 pounds, 9 ounces, 21 inches long. And
Was it a Halloween character?
Is it what?
Is it a Halloween character?
It came as Rory McIlroy, right? So everybody's doing well, and so we're very happy for them.
That's great.
That
Thank
was
you.
it.
That's great. Good
Well,
to hear.
excellent. Well, thanks to everybody for your patience and efforts this evening. Can we get a motion to adjourn? Commissioner Cooper.
Motion to adjourn.
Commissioner Stedjink.
Second.
Okay, let's go ahead and vote. Oh. Unanimous. Great. Thank you.